Chapter 1 She's Back. Oliver awoke at 7 p.m. to see the crimson-colored sun sinking into the faraway distance. Oliver had slept throughout the day in order to preserve his energy for the night, for he was a creature of the night, a man who lived under the dimly lit moon and moved only within the shadows. This was Oliver Page, the vampire. Oliver got out of bed and walked over to the window to watch the waves of the ocean crash against the rocks. He watched as the ocean breathed in and out while trying to match its tempo with his own breathing. Oliver thought to himself how he had missed the days where he could walk for miles along the beach with the waves brushing up against his feet, the days where he could walk freely amongst the humans as one of them, the days before he was cursed. Those days were long gone but never forgotten. While Oliver looked out at the world deeply entranced by his own thoughts, his concentration was broken by the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. It was Trevor, his loyal companion and servant, holding a glass of blood for his master. "Good evening, sir. It's almost time for your meeting with Mr. Arthur Carrick," said Trevor. "Why do you think Arthur has contacted me after so long?" asked Oliver while turning to face Trevor and taking the drink from his hand. "He's made me fly halfway across the world to come see him, but he couldn't even tell me what it was about." "Mr. Carrick only gets in touch when it's important, sir. I'm sure he didn't give you all the details for a good reason. This doesn't sit well with me. However, I cannot ignore it. Bring the car around, Trevor. Let us see what this immortal bastard wants with me." Oliver arrived at the bar where he was to meet with Arthur. He instructed Trevor to wait for him in the car, and then made his way inside. The bar was called Millennium, and was owned by another vampire by the name of Richard Stark. Every mythical creature knew of this bar, for it held one of several portals that served as a bridge between Earth and the realm of Albec, the realm in which most of the mythical creatures resided in, a place that Oliver had no interest in visiting unless it was of great importance. The bar was dimly lit and barely had any people in it. Oliver looked around thinking of how it had been decades since he last visited the bar, yet nothing had changed. Oliver was immediately noticed by Richard, the bar owner, who invited him in and greeted him warmly. "I have not seen you in a long time, my old friend. What brings you here?" "I have a meeting with Arthur," replied Oliver. "What about?" "Beats me." "Well, let me take you downstairs and you can ask him yourself." Richard led Oliver through to the back of the bar, where they walked through the kitchen and to the freezer that stood at the far end of the room. "New door?" asked Oliver. "Yeah, the big shiny one was drawing a little too much attention," replied Richard sarcastically. Richard pulled out a key that was on a chain around his neck and unlocked the door. "I'll see you on the other side. I just have to round up a few things here." Oliver nodded and walked through the door. The Millennium Bar was not just an establishment that held a portal within it that separated the two realms, but the bar itself lied on the borderline of the two realms and existed in both places simultaneously. When Oliver walked through the portal, he found himself walking through the same front door he had walked through when he first entered the bar on Earth. The bar was identical in every way, except for the energy of the place. The place was filled with customers of all races. Vampires, werewolves, goblins, and any other creature you might have believed to be a myth. Once again, Oliver made his way to the bar, but this time it was to order a drink. When Oliver sat down at the bar, the bartender placed a napkin down in front of him with the scotch. Oliver, a little confused, called the bartender back and asked, "What is this?" "Well, your drink was already ordered and paid for, sir." "By who?" "By me, Oliver." Oliver knew this voice. It had been over a century since he had last heard it, but it was something that he'd never forget. Oliver turned his body and looked to the man sitting beside him. The man wore a black suit with a black tie and a fedora that was slightly tiled to the side. "How did you know what I was going to order?" "Well, I am an information broker, so I have to know everyone's business. But if I have to be honest, Oliver, I've known you for years and you've always ordered the same thing." Oliver drank the entire glass in one go, and then signaled for another. "Why am I here, Arthur?" "You might want to down that second glass first, then ask for the bottle and come with me." The two picked up their drinks and made their way to a small table at the back of the bar, far from all the ruckus and all the types of pandemonium you'd expect to find in a bar like this. "She's back, Oliver." "What do you mean? Who's back?" "Helena, Oliver, Helena." Oliver looked down at the table, feeling completely confused, trying to process what he had just heard. Oliver gripped onto the glass in his hand so tightly that he didn't feel the glass crack, and the shards of glass cutting into his skin. "Tell me everything." "If you insist." The lift opened and Alice Grayson emerged with 2 coffees in hand and rushed to her cubicle. She could not afford to be late again, seeing as it wouldn't be the first or second time this week. She rushed over to her cubicle, where she found her colleague and best friend Sammy waiting in her chair. "And here, I thought you weren't coming in today," said Sammy with a grin on her face. I thought for sure you had a hangover after last night. I didn't drink last night, said Alice as she passed Sammy her coffee. I'm late because I was following up on a lead. Seems like it didn't pan out though. I'll have to retrace my steps and interview whoever is willing to talk. That sounds great, said Sammy, but I had quite a bit to drink, so thank you and thank God Almighty for this coffee, as she brought the coffee to her lips. Get up, Sammy, my feet are killing me, groaned Alice. Okay, said Sammy as she jumped out of Alice's seat. Alice sat down and immediately kicked off her heels, and hid them under her desk while slumping into her seat until her head was completely out of view under the walls of her cubicle. Alice untied her bun and let her hair fall down. Feeling as if the bun she had made before leaving for work was starting to pull out brain cells, she let loose. She rubbed at her eyes, trying to force the sleep out of them. Ah! groaned Alice while stretching her arms over the walls of her cubicle. Did you see the guy standing in Christina's office? Alice pulled herself out of her seat and peeked out of her cubicle to be able to see who Sammy was talking about. The man wore a well-tailored pinstripe suit and wore his hair back. He looked important for sure. What do you think they're talking about? Asked Sammy. I don't know, but it looks like they're done. Christina led the man out of her office, thanking him for the opportunity, and walked him towards the elevator. She turned around and made her way towards Alice and the rest of the journalists who'd been watching the interaction take place the entire time. Can I please get everyone's attention? Said Christina while standing in the middle of the bullpen. The man that just left my office is from a charity organization that is looking to raise money for the underprivileged and homeless. They will be hosting an event next week, and would like all the major papers to attend. Apparently some mysterious benefactor popped out of nowhere and no one knows who he is. He donated $250 million towards the charity, and the charity's chairperson, the man who just left my office, wants the best coverage. So tell me who's available. Sammy. No can do, boss, replied Sammy. I have a solid lead for the hijackings that have been occurring by the docks. I have too much on my plate. Brian. I can't at the moment, boss. I have the public park article to wrap up. Alice? Are you available? Well, I do have quite a bit of work, but sure, I can do it. Okay, great, replied Christina. The article is yours. Gotcha, boss, replied Alice. Christina nodded in agreement and then made her way back to her office. Why did I say yes to that article? Sighed Alice while slumping back into her chair. I have so much work as well. Plus, Christina really wants this article to go well. You saw how happy she looked while walking that guy out of her office. Don't worry, you'll be fine, said Sammy, still sipping at her coffee. You just have to attend the fundraiser and write an article on this guy who made the big donation. He's probably some old man that's coming to the end of his life and doesn't know what to do with the money. Plus, these events always have open bars. Yeah, you're right, said Alice, now sounding a bit more enthusiastic. I have been trying to get more FaceTime with Christina. I'm sure this is my big break. That's my girl. Now tell me, what are you going to wear? Chapter 3 Worlds Collide. Hale, Alice's mother, had not been doing too well for the past couple of months and had been in and out of hospital. The medical bills were starting to pile up, and Alice, being the only one in the house being able to work, had a world of pressure on her shoulders, way too much for someone her age. The two of them had lived alone ever since Alice's father walked out on them when Alice was still just a child. She didn't know his name and she didn't care. Her mother was her mother and father, and she did an excellent job at both, but now it was Alice's turn to take care of her mother. Alice leaned over her mother, who was asleep, and put her hand on her forehead to check if she had started heating up again. She then kissed her mother and made for the door when she heard her mother's voice. Alice, where are you going? Asked Hale in a low tone as if she struggled to let the words out. I'm going to a fundraiser, Mom. I'll be home late, so don't forget to take your medication, okay? Okay, my dear. But Alice, just one more thing. Yes, Mom. You look beautiful. Alice smiled and walked back over to kiss her mother on the forehead again. Thanks, Mom. Now get some rest. Alice arrived early to the fundraiser. She wore a blue sapphire dress that fit her slender body perfectly and wore her hair down. Both her hair and dress flowed like a beautiful river that reflected the night sky. Alice walked into the hall where she was met by hundreds of influential people from across the world, people she would not usually have the pleasure of mingling with so early on in her career. She felt the tension in her shoulders and did not hesitate to grab a glass of champagne from every waiter that passed her within the first hour. As the alcohol set in, so did her ease, and Alice found that the tension had left her body. However, she still found it difficult to move around the room. She felt an aura of intimidation from all the guests around her. Alice felt as if she were in another world, but soon found herself entranced their ways. Elderly men accompanied by women young enough to be their daughters, caviar being served on silver trays and champagne that would probably cost her 2 months of her salary. Alice wanted to engage, but what could she possibly be able to add to the conversation? What insight did a 22-year-old have that these wealthy men and women didn't already possess? "Don't be fooled by all of them," said a voice from beside her. Alice looked and noticed a handsome young man, with golden hair and blue eyes standing right next to her. He smiled while looking in the same direction as she was. "What do you mean?" asked Alice. "Well, a lot of these people only gained wealth to receive the recognition that came with it. Those young women don't actually like those men, they like their money. And the crazy thing is, men are completely aware of this." "How so?" "Well, men are extremely fragile creatures, especially their egos. Men hate feeling inferior, and most of all they hate rejection. That is why men work so hard to get the higher paying jobs, and spend longer hours in the gym, not just to feel more empowered, but because of their fear of rejection." "Are you sure you're a man? You sure like calling them out on their bullshit," joked Alice. "Well, I would like to think I'm an okay guy, I guess," replied the man. The two laughed. "So why are you here tonight?" asked the man. "This doesn't look like your sort of crowd." "Well, I'm actually a journalist," said Alice. "I'm not sure if you heard about the mystery man who made this big donation towards this charity, but I'm trying to land an interview with him for an article I'm writing. I hope he shows soon though. He probably thinks the world revolves around him with the type of money he has. He actually doesn't sound like that bad of a guy if he's making such a big donation." The man laughed. "I think he might just be late. Who knows?" The two spoke for quite a long time until the MC of the event, the same man who came out of Christina's office a few days ago, came up on stage, and the two turned to face him. "Welcome everyone. I hope you all have had enough to drink, and that your night is going great. I would like to thank each and every one of you for your contributions towards the charity. I'm sure tonight will change many people's lives. I would, however, like to welcome a specific benefactor to stage. The man who contributed $250 million towards our project. So everyone, please give a round of applause to the man of the evening, Oliver Page." "Excuse me," said the man. "Where are you going?" asked Alice. "Well, they just called my name," said Oliver as he turned to her with a smile and then turned back towards the stage and made his way up. Alice watched as Oliver climbed the steps of the stage, still confused about what had just happened. Was that really him? She thought to herself. She watched in awe as he started his speech. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Oliver Page, and believe it or not, I am no one special. I am just someone who understands struggle and found it very difficult to see what had happened to me. Happened to millions across the world. Not just me, but all of us in this room. We all have a duty to humanity, and we have the power to do it. So let us do it together. Thank you." The crowd clapped and cheered as Oliver made his way down the stage with people surrounding him. How entitled he looked, thought Alice to herself, unaware that he was making his way back to her. "Hello again," said Oliver, now standing in front of Alice. "Would you perhaps like to go for dinner sometime? I'll even give you that interview." Oliver laughed. Alice, now feeling a bit silly having not asked the man his name while they spoke for so long, looked away and then looked back at him. "Only if you promise to come on time," said Alice with a smile. The limo pulled up in front of the restaurant and Alice looked out of the window somewhat confused. "I don't know this place," she exclaimed. "Well, actually, I've been coming here for many years and I am very good friends with the owner," said Oliver as he moved up to look at the restaurant through the window beside her. "I didn't know you visited New York that often," said Alice. "Well, my business takes me all over the world, but wherever I go, I always find myself coming back to New York to breathe in the city. But hey, let's eat," said Oliver with a warm smile. Alice reached for the door to open it when Oliver stopped her. "Wait." Oliver jumped out of his side of the limo and rushed over to open the door for Alice. "Well, that was a little unexpected," said Alice. "Don't you billionaire types let your drivers do this sort of thing?" Oliver giggled. "Yes, we do, but I couldn't give Trevor this honor." Oliver put his hand out and helped Alice out of the limo, and the two made their way inside. When they got into the restaurant, Alice realized that the place was actually much nicer than she expected, judging from how it looked from the outside and the area that it was in. The lighting was bright and the theme of the restaurant looked like a mixture of Greek and Italian. But weirdly enough, the look worked. When they walked through the door, they were greeted by the hostess, asking them if they had made a reservation. Oliver shook his head and Alice, feeling a bit embarrassed by how full the restaurant was, didn't think they were going to get a table. "Let's just go somewhere else," said Alice. "I'm sure you can't just slip this hostess some money and magically get a table." "Wait, is that a thing? Can I do that?" asked Oliver. "No, you can't," Alice laughed. As the two stood in front by the check-in, the owner Tom Reed noticed Oliver and came over to the check-in. "Oliver, is that you?" asked Tom. "Yes, Tom, it's me," said Oliver as he embraced Tom. "You still look exactly the same since I last saw you. I, on the other hand, have gotten old and I can't seem to get this kink out of my back," said Tom. "But who is this with you?" Tom turned to face Alice, but as soon he looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. "Good evening," said Alice with a warm smile. "Good evening," said Tom while trying to hide his emotions. "It's very nice to meet you." Tom signaled to the hostess that he would sort out their seating and led Oliver and Alice to a table with a reserved sign on it at the back of the restaurant. "Here we are," said Tom. "I will go and get everything prepared." "Thank you," said Oliver, and Tom walked to the kitchen. "What was that all about?" asked Alice. "Why did he get so emotional when he saw me? Maybe he thought you were someone else?" "Who knows?" Oliver laughed. Tom returned with a bottle of red wine and placed it on the table. "Your meals are almost complete." "But we haven't even ordered," Alice called out, but Tom had already left for the kitchen again, not hearing her at all. Oliver poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Alice. "I hope you like it," said Oliver. Alice took a sip of the wine, and surely enough she did. The wine was great. "So tell me more about yourself," said Oliver as he sipped his wine. "Well, there's not much to say. I've lived in Queens my entire life, busted my ass off to get a college scholarship, and now I'm trying to make a name for myself at my magazine." "How about family?" asked Oliver. "My father walked out on me and my mother when I was still just a child. For a long time I blamed myself for being born, thinking that I was the reason he had left. Turns out he was just an asshole that couldn't care less. But hey, you aren't here to interview me. I'm here to interview you." Yes, I apologize, I just wanted to get to know the person who was interviewing me as well. But okay, what would you like to know?" "Well, for starters, how did you make your money?" "I made my money acquiring property around the world, but if I have to be perfectly honest, most of it is old money." "So you inherited it?" "Something like that, yes." "Okay, and what about the fundraiser?" "What about it?" asked Oliver. "Well, up until a few days ago no one knew who you were, but somehow you just popped onto the scene with that outrageous donation. I understand the feeling of wanting to help those less fortunate than us, but what made you donate the money out of the blue? Was it just for media attention?" Oliver leaned back into his chair, looking as if he was trying to gather his thoughts while rubbing the bottom of his chin. "Would you believe me if I told you I made that big donation just to get your attention?" asked Oliver. Alice looked at him confused. No, I wouldn't," she replied. Oliver laughed. "I'm only joking," he said. "I have made all this money over all these years and I have traveled the entire world countless times, and all that it taught me was money isn't everything. Money can't buy happiness and it cannot bring back the dead. Or break curses." "What do you mean? Did you lose someone important to you?" "Yes, many years ago. And ever since then my life has never been the same." The two continued to speak about Oliver's past until they were interrupted by Tom, who had brought their food. "The steak for you as always, Mr. Page, and for the lady the pasta. Please enjoy." Oliver thanked Tom and the two started their meal. "How is the food?" asked Oliver. "I don't know," said Alice. "It's great. But there's something else about it that I can't figure out. Why does it taste so familiar?" Oliver smiled on as he watched Alice enjoy her meal. After the meal was done, the two continued their conversation while ordering another bottle of wine. "Tell me about your travels," said Alice. "I have never left New York, so tell me, what's out there that I won't be able to find in a magazine?" "The world can be a big or small place depending on the lens you look at it with," Oliver started. "My travels have taken me to many places you wouldn't be able to find in a book. Or maybe you could find it in a book, but the book has been lost to history." "What type of places?" asked Alice, sounding very interested. "Do you mean Atlantis?" she joked. No, Oliver laughed. "But these places do have rich histories that speak about ancient civilizations that weren't exactly human. For example, the hieroglyphics within the pyramids in ancient Egypt and the Aztec temples in South America. Both have imagery of beings with reptilian heads and the bodies of men and women. It is said that in ancient times, people would give offerings to these beings in the form of food and sometimes even offer up the lives of their children. They feared that these beings would take everything from them, like vampires who suck the nutrients from the very earth under their feet, cursing them to a life of hardship and torment." "So what do you believe?" asked Alice. "I believe there are many things in this life that we have yet to figure out. I am not someone who rules out the possibility of the impossible." Alice looked at Oliver, not being able to put her finger on it, but there was something about him that she found alluring and different. It wasn't her instincts as a journalist that made her want to know more, but her curiosity as a woman. Chapter 5. The morning after. Oliver drove home while looking out of the window of the limo, watching as the world passed him by. He could not stop smiling, for the night was a success and things were going according to plan. "How was your evening, sir?" asked Trevor as he watched his master through the rearview mirror of the limo, watching as his master looked out at the world with a glimmer of hope in his eyes that Trevor had not seen from his master in decades. "It was great, Trevor," replied Oliver. "She was exactly how I remembered her. Her quirks, her smile, her long black hair. Everything was exactly how I remembered it to be. However, there's something about this that has been bugging me ever since I learned that Helena had been reincarnated into Alice Grayson." "What is it? Why did I find out about her reincarnation so late, and why did it take so long for her to be reincarnated again? So many things about this doesn't add up." "I believe you should give it time," said Trevor. "Her memories have not started to come back yet, so enjoy your time with her, because you don't know when they will return, spelling the end of her existence in this lifetime. You have waited for her for 81 years. You deserve to be happy." "Thank you, Trevor." Alice sat at her desk the next morning, chewing at the tip of her pencil trying to figure out what to write for her article, but found it difficult to formulate anything because she didn't have much to go on. She remembered taking her notebook to the interview, but not once taking it out to take notes. She tried thinking about the man that she had spent her night with, and things she had learned about him that would interest her readers, but what did she actually know about him? He seemed very much like a people's person, but had a look of loneliness in his eyes. He was interesting and open to conversation, but not open enough to let any personal details about him be known. Could she write about how he accumulated his wealth? Maybe, but he was very vague when speaking about the topic. He said that it was old money but didn't mention family at all. He seemed more interested in getting to know her than she in getting to know him. What a joke, she thought to herself. Alice typed and deleted and typed again, getting frustrated that the article couldn't just write itself. She reached for her water bottle but then realized it was empty when picking it up, irritating her even more and throwing the bottle to the ground. "You okay over there?" asked Sammy while sticking her head over the cubicle to check on her friend. "I don't know, Sammy," replied Alice. "I'm pretty sure my career is over. Christina really wanted the article for this Mr. Page to go well, but last night at dinner we spoke about everything but him. All I know is that he's kind, handsome and has blue eyes that put the Atlantic to shame. Worst part is I really want to see him again, but for all the wrong reasons. Damn girl, why are you beating yourself up for wanting to see a man again? You just mentioned all the traits of a man that I would definitely throw my career away for. The only thing you didn't mention was that he had a great ass." "Well, he did," replied Alice. "Ah, then you're screwed. Too bad he didn't ask you out for a second date." "Last night wasn't a date, Sammy. Get over yourself," snapped Alice. "Well, I'm not too sure about that," said Sammy as her eyes followed a man holding a giant bouquet of roses walking in her and Alice's direction. "I'm pretty sure those aren't for me." "Hi, I am looking for Alice Grayson," said the delivery man who was now standing in front of Alice and Sammy. "Hi, that's me," said Alice. "Hi, Miss Grayson, this was sent from Mr. Page and also, he asked for me to give you this note." The delivery man handed Alice the bouquet of roses and the note and then made his way out. Alice opened the note to check what it said. "I thoroughly enjoyed our time last night. I am also aware that I probably wasn't open enough with you to give you enough information for your article, so please allow me the chance to make it up to you tonight by taking you out. I will meet you in Central Park at 8 p.m. From O. Page." Alice looked up from the note and thought to herself, the nerve of this. Chapter 6. The start of winter. After a while of fighting with her inner self, she came to the conclusion that it was worth it, and that the cold was just a byproduct of her future success at the magazine. She looked at her watch that read 7:55 p.m., asking herself if she was this desperate to see Oliver that she would come before the designated time, not even thinking of coming a minute later in order to create any mystery around herself, making him think if she was the one who was coming or not. But no, she wanted to see him. The next 5 minutes felt like an eternity as Alice watched the seconds pass and felt the cold starting to get to her, making her shiver quite a bit. She put her hands together and rubbed them while blowing warm air into them in order to stop her fingers from turning into popsicles. She pulled at the sleeves of her cardigan and tried tucking her hands into them. As she struggled to get her hands into her sleeves, Oliver emerged from around the corner holding 2 coffees. "Hi," said Oliver excitedly as he waved at Alice. Alice turned to face Oliver and felt all the irritability she had built up waiting for him, just leaving her body as she turned to face him with a smile that grew wide on her face. She was happy to see him. Hey, said Alice as she walked towards him. I'm sorry that I'm late. I tried getting here earlier, but as I was walking over, I decided to grab us a couple of coffees. I hope you didn't wait too long for me. No, I also just got here, Alice lied. Oliver saw that her hands were tucked into her sleeves and put the coffees down on a bench. What are you doing? I thought I was getting one of those, said Alice. Well, I don't want you to freeze to death before even getting a chance to even drink the coffee. Here, put this on. Oliver took off his coat and put it on Alice, rubbing her arms to cause some friction, heating her body up. Thank you, said Alice while looking deeply into Oliver's eyes as he stood not even a foot away from her. She held her breath, for she didn't know what was about to happen, but luckily for her, Oliver pulled away and picked up the coffees and handed one to her. That was close, thought Alice to herself. She did not want to give in to temptation, for she had a job to do, an interview to perform. The two walked through the park and Alice asked Oliver all the questions she had wanted to ask him the previous night. Who was his family? Where was he from? Oliver had rehearsed his answers all day because he knew that they were coming, and he was fully prepared to answer them all. Oliver told Alice about his family and his relationship with his father, and how it was very difficult to impress him, for he had unrealistic expectations of his children. He told her about his siblings and that he hadn't seen his family in a very long time. He also told her about the love of his life who he lost and how painful it was. He told her parts of the truth and sometimes lied. He did not want to tell her anything that might trigger her memories, for her memories were the key to her demise. Alice listened attentively, and did not let him drag her into his own topics that would derail the interview like the night before. For just as Oliver rehearsed his answers all day, Alice too prepared for the showdown, preparing her questions. Alice acted professionally to the end and did not let her temptation take over, for she did feel some type of attraction to him, but it wasn't the money, the looks, or the conversation, no. It was something that she couldn't explain. Alice completed her interview feeling satisfied with her findings. She then thanked Oliver for being a little more cooperative this time around. They said their goodbyes and Alice tried giving Oliver his coat back, but he absolutely refused, which Alice could not lie was very sweet. The two walked in opposite directions, not saying another word to another. As the two parted ways, neither looked back, but both walked with a smile on their face. Alice feeling accomplished, and Oliver getting to enjoy time with his soulmate. Oliver wanted to turn around and just call out to her, asking her to see him tomorrow night, but didn't feel brave enough. But as he walked on in deep thought, his trance was broken from a voice behind him. It was Alice. Let's get Chinese tomorrow night, okay? Oliver turned around and stood still for a second before running back to Alice and putting his warm hands on her face, pulling her towards him, kissing her deeply. She did not expect this, but she couldn't find it in her to pull back, for she wanted it, and slowly, she felt herself pulling him now into her, letting loose of all her temptation towards him. She felt the heat of pleasure run through her body, making her warm and wet. She could not fight it anymore, she wanted him. Oliver pulled away and opened his eyes while Alice did the same. They looked at one another and both knew what the other was thinking. Why could this moment not last forever? But eventually Alice pulled away and kissed Oliver once again. This time on the cheek, and said her goodbyes and walked into the night. Wait, one more thing, said Oliver. It's a yes on the Chinese tomorrow night. Alice turned and smiled and then continued on her way. Oliver watched on before turning and walking in the opposite direction once again. As Oliver walked through the park, he stopped by a fountain and decided to sit by a bench while looking at the reflection of the moon. He started to think about Helena and how their only sin was loving one another. He hated the idea that Alice would be destined to a fate that no one deserved. He wanted to break the curse for her. Chapter 7. A line being crossed. As Alice walked through the park, she put her hands in the pockets of Oliver's coat, and pulled the collar to her face to breathe in his scent. She walked with a hop in her step, for she was happy. Temptation did not stand in the way of her career, and her career did not stop her from giving in to temptation. However, the coat she had been wearing, although warm, did not reach down to her legs, and because she had been wearing a pencil skirt, her legs were exposed and the cold started to seep in ever so slightly, making Alice pick up the pace till she could get to the road and get a taxi home. But as she walked along the path, the amount of people that passed her by had completely thinned out, and she was now alone on the path. Alice watched as the trees cluttered and rustled around her as she walked in the darkness of the night. Alice looked behind her and thought she saw the shadow of a man, and it made her pick up her pace once more. She walked vigorously and could not be more eager to get to the road. She turned around and saw the shadow was gone, but she did not feel less afraid, actually the opposite. She walked quickly, her senses on high alert. She heard the sound of the bushes rustling once again around her, but this time it was different. She could hear the sound of twigs being snapped as if they were being trampled on, as if someone was following her through the bushes. Oliver heard the sound of a scream. He recognized the voice, and it was Alice. He jumped off the bench and ran through the trees at top speed, following the sound of her voice and also her scent. Oliver got onto the path and found Alice's notebook lying on the floor. He stopped to close his eyes and listen to the sounds around him. "There!" he shouted before opening his eyes and jumping once again into the bushes, running full speed towards Alice. When Oliver found Alice, a man with a gray hoodie stood over her beaten body and her clothes ripped to shreds. Alice looked pretty hurt but alive. Oliver looked on, enraged by the sight before his eyes. He could feel the blood boiling from inside of him and his fangs start to grow along with his nails. It was as if the transformation had ripped him of his humanity. Oliver charged at Alice's attacker in a fit of rage, but the attacker easily dodged it. He turned to face Oliver and Oliver saw that the attacker also had fangs. He was also a vampire. Why would a vampire target Alice? Oliver couldn't care less about figuring that now though. The only thing on his mind was ripping out this man's throat. Once again, Oliver charged at the attacker, now grabbing his jacket and pulling him towards him as he tried striking the attacker in his face with his claws. Oliver managed to swipe him and the blood gushed from his face. The attacker stuck out his tongue as the blood ran to his mouth and laughed before taking initiative, now going after Oliver. The two exchanged blows, with Oliver being beaten to a pulp but also not letting up, giving back as much he got and eventually gaining the upper hand. Oliver threw the attacker against the tree, trying to break his back. "What the FCK have you done?" shouted Oliver while kicking the attacker in the ribs as he lied helplessly at his feet. Oliver got down to his knees and started pummeling the face of the hopeless creature that had made the biggest mistake of his insignificant life. Oliver got up and hit the tree, breaking off a piece of wood, sharpening it in order to stake the vampire that had hurt the person he treasured most, the love of his miserable f***ing existence. Oliver looked over at Alice before making the final blow, then took a big breath and looked back at the attacker and staked him through the heart without hesitation. Oliver breathed heavily as he looked down at his defeated opponent and pulled the stake out of his heart and threw it to the ground. As he got up, he noticed something strange under the attacker's sleeve, a sort of tattoo. Oliver pulled up the sleeve in order to get a better look at the tattoo, and what he found he could not believe. It was the symbol of the Greek vampire clan. When Oliver reached Alice, she was barely conscious. He dropped to the floor and held her in his arms as he wept. He then pulled out his phone and called Trevor to pick them up in order to take them back to the penthouse so that he could tend to her wounds. Alice lied, beaten and swollen on Oliver's bed while Trevor tended to her wounds. Oliver watched on as he sat in a chair in the corner of the room, trying to figure out why a vampire from the Greek clan would come after Alice. "I need to go see him," said Oliver as he stood up. "Would you like me to drive you, sir?" "No, look after Alice. I will be back soon." Oliver picked up his coat and made his way to his private lift that took him directly to the garage. Oliver pulled out of the parking bay and sped off in search of the immortal Arthur Carrick. He would know why the Greek clan had made a move on him. Chapter 8. Unanswered Questions. Oliver pulled up at the Millennium and marched straight over to the bar. "Where's Richard?" demanded Oliver. The bartender pointed to the corner where Richard was sitting with a group of customers sharing a meal and laughing at his own jokes. Oliver signaled at Richard and Richard came over stumbling from intoxication. "Would you like a drink?" asked Richard, clearly drunk and red as a tomato. "I need to find Arthur," said Oliver irritably while taking the drink out of Richard's hand. "What's the rush? You just got here. Don't be such a bore." "Don't FCK with me, Richard. The Greek clan came after someone I love tonight, and I want to know why." "Wait, what? Why?" "That's what I'm here to find out. Tell me, where can I find him? Is he somewhere in Albeck?" Richard, now understanding the gravity of the situation, pulled himself together. "Okay, don't worry, he's not in Albeck. He sometimes likes to come out and get a glimpse of the city whenever he gets a chance. And where do you think you can get the best view of the city?" "Empire State?" "Bingo. Thank you, Richard," said Oliver as he dashed back out of the bar and jumped into his car, making his way to the Empire State Building. When Oliver got to the Empire State Building, he drove around the back and parked his car outside. He jumped out of the car and looked around him to see if anyone could see him. There was no one. Oliver jumped up the side of the building, climbing and grappling up the ledges like a lion after its prey. When he got to the top, he found that it was empty and looked around for Arthur, but no one was there. "Arthur!" shouted Oliver. "Arthur, I need your help." Oliver screamed his name in desperation until he could no more. "Maybe I'm too late," he thought to himself. Oliver decided that the best thing to do was to leave and go check on Alice. Oliver made his way back to the ledge and prepared to jump down when he heard the sound of someone whistling behind him. Oliver turned around and saw a man standing with his back to him, looking out at the city. The man wore an all-black suit and a fedora that was slightly tilted to the side. He turned around and looked Oliver straight in the eyes. It was the immortal Arthur Carrick. "Did you hear me calling you this whole time, or did you just get here?" asked Oliver irritably. "I heard you," said Arthur while looking at Oliver from the side of his eyes and puffing at his cigarette. "I just wanted to listen to you call out my name. It was nice. You know why I'm here, Arthur?" Oliver walked over and stood next to Arthur. "Do you still smoke?" asked Arthur while offering Oliver a cigarette. "Yeah," said Oliver. Oliver took the cigarette and lit it. The two smoked in silence until Arthur had finished his cigarette, throwing it to the ground and killing it with his foot. "Someone wants Alice dead, Oliver," said Arthur as he turned to face his friend. "Why?" "To hurt you for rejecting them. I'm sure you saw what clan that vampire was from. It wasn't just a coincidence that it happened to be the Greek vampire clan. Someone from that clan wants to hurt you as much as possible, and that someone is now the head of the Greek clan, Ophelia." Oliver, trying to gather his thoughts, looked out at the city, and then back to his friend until finally asking, "How?" "She killed King Leon and took the throne for herself. She now has the entire might of the Greek vampire army at her disposal," said Arthur. "She's going to come after Alice, Oliver. You need to figure out a plan to keep her safe. What are you going to do?" Oliver took the last puff of his cigarette before throwing it over the balcony and looking at Arthur. "I'm going to tell her the truth." Oliver thanked his friend and made his way to the edge of the building. Before he got to the edge, he had a thought and he turned around and called out to Arthur. "Can I ask you one more thing?" "Sure," replied Arthur. "You're an information broker. You only sell information to people that have something you want. I have money here in this world and in Albeck. I have numerous resources. So why is it that you have never asked me for anything in return? You own nothing of value to me. I just feel sorry for you." Oliver laughed at the blunt reply he received and continued to jump down the building and get to his car. When Oliver returned to his penthouse, he found Alice bandaged and the buckets of water next to the bed stained red from the clothes used to clean her wounds. Oliver sat down on the bed and watched as she slept. He moved her long black hair out of her face and caressed her skin with his finger. Oliver heard the door open behind him and turned to find Trevor, standing in the doorway. "Thank you for everything you did, Trevor," said Oliver. "Do not worry, sir," said Trevor. "She's going to be okay. She looks worse than she actually is. She's a tough one." Oliver laughed. "Yeah, she is." Oliver sat up straight, having not moved an inch the entire night as he watched Alice sleep, trying to deal with the guilt that felt like a virus tearing his insides apart. Oliver knew that Alice had seen him for what he truly was the night before, and he felt sick at the thought of Alice ever looking at him with even an ounce of fear in her eyes, the way she looked at the vampire who tried taking her life. Trevor came over to the bed and checked Alice's bandages. "Go sleep," said Trevor. "You look exhausted." "I want to be here when she wakes up," said Oliver, not moving his eyes from Alice. "I understand that you want to show her you care, sir, but last night was not easy for you either. You sustained quite a lot of damage as well. Go rest, I will look after her. If she wakes up, I'll call you immediately." "Thank you, Trevor," said Oliver as he headed out of the room and made his way downstairs in order to get some rest. Alice awoke that evening, slowly fluttering her eyes in order to focus her vision. She looked outside and the world was in complete darkness apart from some city lights that could be seen in the distance. She tried sitting up, but the pain in her ribs was too much and she felt herself falling backwards onto the bed. She tried once again, this time holding one arm around her waist and used the other to push herself up from the bed. As she sat up, she looked around the room confused, trying to figure out where she was. As her eyes followed the decor around the room, she started to feel lightheaded and got a headache that went through her entire brain, making the pain swell behind her eyes. She held her head with her eyes closed, screaming in agony. She watched as visions of the night before passed through her head, reliving her attack. She watched as a man stood over her in what she believed at the time to be her last moments. She tried shutting her eyes even tighter in order to block out the images and memories that rushed into her head, but they would not stop. She saw herself on the floor, lying with her head to the side, looking into the trees and seeing Oliver emerge from behind them. She watched as he transformed into a monster, throwing away any shred of the man she had spent the night with prior to that. What was he? Who was he? What happened in that moment? Was it just shock that was making her recall her memories to be more horrifying than they actually were? No, that couldn't be it. She knew what she saw. The pain lasted what felt like an eternity but eventually subsided. Alice forced her eyes open and tried getting out of bed. She moved her body and managed to get her feet to the floor. She pushed herself up while still holding her ribs. Her legs were numb and did not feel strong enough to keep her up straight, let alone walk, and she fell back down to the bed. As Alice sat helplessly on the bed, she heard the sound of footsteps coming from behind the door on the far side of the room. The door opened and it was Trevor, holding a tray with food and a glass of water. "Good evening, Miss Grayson. How are you feeling?" asked Trevor. "You slept the entire day and I was starting to worry." "Where am I?" asked Alice frantically. "You're in Mr. Page's penthouse, Miss Grayson," answered Trevor. "He brought you here last night after you were attacked so that I could take care of your wounds." "What happened last night? What was that thing that attacked me? I don't understand what is going on. Where is Oliver?" "Mr. Page is downstairs, Miss Grayson. I chased him down to get some rest and to get something to eat, for he spent the entire night by your side, watching over you." "Don't let me go downstairs," pleaded Alice while grabbing Trevor's sleeve, yanking him towards her. "Oliver isn't who he says he is. The creature that attacked me last night had superhuman abilities and Oliver killed it with his bare hands. I saw his fangs grow and watched as his fingers turned to claws. You have to get me out of here." "Miss Grayson," said Trevor as he lifted her hand off of his arm, "I know you have a lot of questions, but I do not believe that it is my place to answer you. That obligation falls on Mr. Page. I know that you are frightened and have absolutely no idea of what is going on. Any person in their right mind would be freaking out right now, but you have to trust me, and most importantly, Mr. Page. The love he has for you runs deep, Miss Grayson. I know what you saw last night was extremely difficult to witness, but the man sitting downstairs only tried protecting you as he has been doing his entire life." "Entire life? What do you mean?" "Come with me downstairs, Miss Grayson. Everything will soon be explained." Chapter 10. Tell me everything. Oliver sat on the floor in front of the fireplace, watching the flames as they danced around when he heard footsteps coming down the stairs behind him. He jumped up and turned around to face Alice, who was leaning on the railing of the stairs while still holding her ribs. Oliver rushed over to Alice and helped her down the last few steps until she was on solid ground, where she then walked over to the bar, pouring herself a drink and going to sit down by the fireplace. The two did not exchange words, but Oliver knew what she wanted. Oliver followed suit and poured himself a drink and sat next to her as they looked into the fire. "Trevor convinced me to hear you out," said Alice as she gulped at her drink rather than sip. "Is that the only reason you're still here?" "No, it isn't. I know that whatever you are, you tried protecting me last night, and that I wouldn't be here without you." "Are you sure you're ready to know the whole truth?" asked Oliver, now gulping at his own drink. "I'm sure." Oliver got up and took their glasses to the bar, where he refilled them and came back to sit next to Alice, handing her the drink. "I'm a vampire that was cursed over 400 years ago," said Oliver. "I was 25 years old when I met a beautiful girl by the name of Helena, who was the daughter of an old, sadistic woman who people claimed was a witch, which I didn't believe at the time. This girl was kind, beautiful, intelligent, and funny. When I saw her, I immediately fell in love. Every day we would meet in secret under the old oak tree that stood on the outskirts of the town where we lived, and slowly our feelings for one another became stronger and stronger, until one day we decided that our lives were not meant to be lived in this small town, and that we wanted to travel the world. We decided that we would tell our families that night, and the following morning, by the strike of dawn, we would leave on our journey." "What did your families say?" asked Alice. "I went to my family, who fully supported me. They gave me money and food for the road, and before dawn, I was ready to leave. However, things didn't go as smoothly for Helena. When she told her mother of her plans, her mother became enraged and felt as if her daughter had betrayed her. Her mother prohibited her from leaving, but Helena snuck out anyway, following her heart and going against her mother's wishes. When Helena's mother found out that Helena had run away, she cursed both me and Helena. She made it so that I would never be able to walk in the sun again, making the rays of the sun feel like the fires of hell when it touched my skin, forcing me not to go see Helena that morning. When I had not showed up to the place where Helena and I had agreed to meet that morning, Helena became concerned and quickly made her way to my house. When she got there, she found me in the outhouse where my family had placed me in order to keep me safe from the sun, and themselves safe from me. She spent the next couple of days with me, but we both knew that my condition was getting worse. The food she brought me did not fill me, and the water did not quench my thirst. Helena watched as I starved and felt helpless that she did not know what to do. One night when she went over to the main house to get more food, she left me in the darkness, and I felt the hunger ripping a hole in my solar plexus. I held onto my stomach for dear life, too scared to let go. Then for the very first time I felt my fangs growing out from my teeth, and it felt as if my teeth were being ripped from my mouth. The pain was excruciating, but what came with it was far worse. For as my fangs grew, they stabbed into my lip and gave me my first taste of blood. I quickly lost sight of who I was and felt like I was in the back seat of my own body. I walked over to the main house and found my family sitting by the dining room table, trying to figure out what to do with me. I watched them from the darkness the same way a predator stalks its prey before attacking, and before I knew it, I had leapt at them, slaughtering them all and drinking their blood. Oliver paused and for a second, looked as if he would not continue with the story when Alice grabbed his arm, squeezing it, making it that he would look at her. "It's okay, Oliver. What happened next?" Helena, who had heard all the commotion from inside the kitchen, hid under the table waiting for things to calm down before she made her escape. She crawled out and made her to the door, where she tried opening it as quietly as possible, but made the mistake of knocking one of the pans to the floor on her way out. She didn't care, she ran for her life, not looking back, but eventually fell, hurting her leg and allowing me the chance to catch up to her. She begged me not to hurt her, but I was not in control of my own body. I cried and pleaded from inside, fighting my body to stop, but my bloodlust had grown so much that my body acted on its own. She looked me in the eyes and stopped resisting, as if she had accepted her fate, and as I held her in my arms, I stuck my fangs into her jugular vein, sucking out her blood and watching as her life force slipped away. When all was said and done, I laid her body down in the meadow as my senses and conscience slowly started returning to me. I felt the pain in my heart grow and the tears gush from my eyes. I stood over the body of the woman I loved and believed that this was the true curse that I would have to live with for the rest of my life, but little did I know, it was only the beginning. 40 years had passed and I had not aged a day. I walked the lands alone with no family and no purpose, hiding in caves during the day and moving within the shadows at night, until one cloudy night I reached a stream and leaned down to get some water, when a young woman from the village nearby came to fetch water as well. She smiled at me as she leaned down to get her water, but I paid her no attention. When she was done, she got up to leave, and by some miracle, the clouds had opened and the light of the moon revealed her face, and I could not believe my eyes, for the person who stood before me was Helena. "I don't understand," said Alice. "What does that mean?" "It was part of the curse," continued Oliver. "Helena was reincarnated into this woman that stood before me. She looked exactly like her but did not share any of her memories, and I believe that this was my second chance. Until one day, memories of her past life started returning and she became very sick, and after a while, died from her illness, leaving me to walk the lands alone once again. I did not realize it at the time, but the curse of our love became more apparent with time, for Helena was reincarnated several times after that without her memories, and once her memories returned, it would mean she would die soon." "Is that why you came to New York?" asked Alice. "Yes," Oliver answered. "You are the reincarnation of Chapter 11 Processing." Alice sat and looked at Oliver, who had now grown silent and looked into the fire with a blank expression. Alice didn't see the confident man she had met the night of the fundraiser, the man who ended every sentence with a light-hearted giggle, the man who seemed as if the world could throw nothing at him that he could not handle, the man who seemed to never let anyone close enough to know his true feelings. No, this was not the same man. The man that sat before her had a clear look of sadness and guilt in his eyes, for his eyes glimmered from the tears that he held back. This man did not cover his emotions or what he really had on his mind. He had let down all the barriers between himself and her. He was completely vulnerable. "None of it was your fault, Oliver," said Alice, breaking the silence. "You didn't try taking Helena away from a life that was better for her. Helena made the choice to leave with you, no one forced her. But if I didn't ask her to leave with me, she could have had a chance to live a normal life. Maybe things would have turned out better for her. You don't know that, Oliver. You're torturing yourself, believing that this curse has been your fault this whole time. But it wasn't." Alice got up and moved closer to Oliver and took his head in her hands and turned his face to look him straight in the eyes. "Your only sin was falling in love with Helena, and if I really am the reincarnation of Helena like you say, then I understand better than anyone why she wanted to run away with you, regardless of the consequences. You're a good man, Oliver." Alice kissed Oliver on the forehead, then forced herself up, still feeling the pain surging through her body. As Alice struggled, Oliver jumped and helped her to her feet. "I need to go now, Oliver," said Alice while holding onto his arm. "Are you sure you need to? After what happened, I think you should stay here for your own safety." "I'll be back, Oliver. I just need time to figure out what is happening, and also I need to check on my mother. I haven't been home since yesterday morning. I need to know she's okay." "Okay, I'll get Trevor to drop you at home." "Thank you," said Alice as she kissed him on the cheek and let go of his arm in order to get her belongings and made her way to the door. Trevor dropped Alice in front of her home, and she greeted him before making her way through the little gate that opened up to a small path that led to the front door. Alice opened up the locks, and as soon as she was safely inside, Trevor took off. Alice locked up behind herself and put all her things down on the table when she came in. "Mom," Alice called out, but there was no response. Alice grew worried and made her way to her mother's room, where she found her bed empty. Alice started to panic as she felt the heat building within her from anxiety, scared of what might have happened to her sick mother. Alice tried calming herself down, and tried to evaluate the situation. Her mother couldn't just vanish, she thought to herself. Maybe her mother got worried about her because she had not been home in 2 days, and she maybe went over to the neighbors to try and help her look for me. "Yes, that must be it," said Alice, trying to convince herself. She pulled herself together and made for the door in order to go see where her mother was when she heard a sound coming from the kitchen. Alice walked down the passage and turned to the kitchen and noticed that it was the only room in the house that's light was on. As Alice moved closer, she heard the sound of metal pots knocking against one another. Alice took out a bottle of pepper spray from her pocket, arming herself, for she was not ready to get jumped again. Alice took the corner and looked into the kitchen and found Hale sitting alone by the kitchen table. "Mom!" shouted Alice as she rushed over to embrace her mother. Hale looked up slowly, her eyes puffy as if she had been crying all day. Hale looked at Alice, realizing it was her daughter standing in front of her, and opened her arms to her. The two embraced one another and held each other as if life itself depended on it. "Where have you been?" asked Hale as she pulled away to get a better look at Alice, who looked pretty banged up and bruised. Alice thought for a bit before she answered, and eventually told her mom she had gone out with Sammy the night before and some thug tried robbing them, but they managed to get away. Alice thought that lying would be the best thing to do right now, for the sake of not worrying her mother, and in order to give herself time to understand this new world she had been flung into. "Sit down," said Hale as she got up to set 2 cups on the kitchen counter and filled them with the tea that she had on the stove. She sat down in front of Alice and handed her a cup. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" asked Hale. "I know that ever since I became sick, you've been taking care of me, but even though I am not the strong woman I used to be, I am still your mother, and if my child needs me to be there for her, I will be there." Alice looked up from her cup and smiled at her mom. "Thank you, Mom," said Alice. "I'm okay, don't worry about me. I love you." The two spoke for a bit until eventually Alice helped her mother to bed. "Get some rest, okay?" said Alice as she tucked Hale in. "Okay, but you do the same." Alice nodded and made her way out of her mother's room, and into her own, where she found her bed and tried to get some sleep. Chapter 12, Shattered Reality. Although Alice was tired, she could not sleep. She lied in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking that not too long ago she had been with a man who claimed to be a vampire, and that he had lived for hundreds of years and had spent countless lifetimes with her. How absurd. Alice thought to herself how all this could be possible, but she failed to come up with any conclusions that satisfied her. Maybe he's delusional, she thought. Maybe she was delusional for thinking he was a vampire in the first place. For if she truly believed that he was actually a vampire, then what Oliver was saying wouldn't be far from the truth. She would actually be the reincarnation of Helena. Alice couldn't accept it, but all the evidence seemed to be pointing in that direction. What if it were true, Alice thought to herself. Then what? Would vampires come after her every night? And also, why did that vampire come after her anyways? Oliver had told her so many things, and she felt so overwhelmed that the question slipped her mind. All she knew was that the world had revealed a side to itself that was so different, and so overwhelming and so interesting, that it scared her. Not even her natural curiosity of being a journalist made her want to uncover the truth. Could this not all just be a dream, thought Alice to herself? But every time she did, the pain from her injuries would pull her back to reality. Alice couldn't stop thinking about what this all meant, but she also could not take the pain, and after a while of struggling, she finally managed to calm down her mind and relax herself enough to fall asleep. When Alice woke up, she felt that something was different from when she went to sleep the previous night. She looked under her clothes and there were no bandages. She got out of bed and realized the marks and bruises in her face were gone too. Alice wept as she fell to the floor, truly believing that everything that happened to her was just a dream. Alice picked herself up, wiped her tears and smiled into the mirror. Today is a new day, thought Alice. She quickly moved around the house with a hop in her step, checking on her mother, then getting dressed and finally finishing up breakfast. She was happy. The night before she had a terrible dream of being attacked by a vampire and finding out that Oliver was a vampire as well. But when she woke up, that's all it would ever be, Alice thought to herself. Just a dream. Alice made sure to make enough breakfast for her to eat as much as she could, and to be able to leave her mom with lots of food as well. She then packed up all her things and made her way outside. Alice breathed in the city, and although New York was not famous for having the cleanest air, the deep breath still brought joy to Alice that made her feel like a weight had been taken off her shoulders, not having to carry the burden of knowing she lived in a world where anyone that walked past her could be a potential vampire or werewolf or whatever else she dreamt of the night before. Alice walked up the block and didn't wait long to get a taxi. Traffic wasn't heavy and Alice got to work on time for a change with a couple of minutes to spare as well. She grabbed 2 coffees before going in and tipped the coffee vendor because she was in a great mood. Her interview with Oliver had gone well, and she could finally write the piece that she'd been planning for days. The lift was quite packed, but Alice managed to squeeze in. She pressed the button for the 13th floor and the doors shut behind her. How normal the day felt, she thought to herself. It was plain and boring, but it made her feel safe, and that made her happy. Alice got out on her floor and looked around the office. She knew that she had been there just yesterday before the interview with Oliver, but the office felt foreign, like she had come from a long vacation and had to adjust to the environment once more. Alice walked over to her cubicle where she found the flower still standing on her desk that Oliver had sent her. But she found it strange that the petals looked somewhat withered when just yesterday they were blood red. Alice sat in her seat and started biting at her nails, trying to wrap her head around why everything felt so different. But just as Alice was drifting into her own world, Sammy came around the corner and almost fainted at the sight of Alice. "Alice, where have you been?" "Hey, what do you mean? I saw you yesterday, didn't I?" "No, Alice, you haven't been to work in 4 days. No one could get hold of you. Where were you?" Alice could not believe what she was hearing. She felt all the happiness inside her disappear and be replaced with fear. Alice tried to stay calm, but internally she was freaking out. She felt nauseous and felt the vomit building up inside her throat. Alice got up and pushed Sammy to the side and ran for the bathroom. Alice flung the door open and ran into a stall to throw up. She didn't want to believe what happened was true. Alice pulled her head away from the toilet and sat on the ground of the stall crying, wishing that life wasn't playing this cruel joke on her. "FCK!" screamed Alice. She hit against the walls of the bathroom stalls, then pushed herself up and flushed the remains of her happy breakfast down the drain. Poetic justice, she thought. Alice walked up to the basin, looking at her ruined makeup, and thought to just wash her face and rinse her mouth while just trying to pull herself together. Alice leaned over the basin and rubbed the makeup off that had been ruined from her tears. She cleaned her mouth and spat until her mouth was clean, then turned the water off and grabbed a paper towel to wipe her face. But as she moved the paper towel out of her eyes, she saw herself in the mirror. But there was one problem: it wasn't her she was seeing, it was someone else. It was Chapter 13, It's All Real. Alice jumped away from the mirror as she looked at the person standing before her. Her hair longer and her clothing from a time long past, but she could not deny it, they had the same face. Alice moved slowly backwards as she stared into the eyes of Helena, who looked directly back at her, with a cold stare. What is happening, thought Alice, was everything Oliver saying true? Alice moved back and knocked into the door of the bathroom stall, startling her and causing her to break eye contact with Helena. When Alice looked again, Helena was gone and Alice was left in the empty bathroom, gasping for air. Alice breathed heavily as the sweat ran down the side of her face. She had grown pale from the shock and looked forward, waiting to see if anything would happen again. She stepped forward, slowly looking at herself in the mirror while touching her face in disbelief. It was all real, Alice thought to herself. She really had been attacked by a vampire, she really was out of work for the past 4 days, but most of all, she really was the reincarnation of Helena. As Alice stared into the mirror, Sammy burst into the bathroom in search of Alice. "Alice, are you okay?" shouted Sammy as she rushed towards Alice. Alice turned slowly to face her friend as tears gushed from her eyes. "What's happening to me?" cried Alice. Sammy grabbed Alice and held her tightly in her arms while stroking the back of her head as Alice sobbed into her shoulder. "It's going to be okay," said Sammy. "Just calm down, all right? Tell me what happened." Alice struggled to find her words, but eventually managed to get it out. "I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" "I can't tell you because I don't know either. Everything doesn't feel real and I don't know how to deal with any of it." "Is it your mom? Is her health acting up again? Look, if you need more help taking care of her, I can come over and help with some things." "No, it's not that, Sammy, it's Oliver Page." "The billionaire? What happened? Did he turn out to be a creep?" "No, Sammy, no. It's just that after I met him, things in my life just seem to make less sense and I don't know what to do." "You do what Alice Grayson does," replied Sammy, now with a big smile on her face. "You face it head on. Girl, you have worked your ass off at this magazine, following down leads that led you to places that would make Brian SHT himself. You got this, okay? Now perk up." Alice looked up and smiled at her friend and nodded. "Okay," said Alice. Alice washed her face and reapplied her makeup and made her way out of the bathroom with Sammy. "Hey, by the way," said Sammy as they walked to their cubicles, "I didn't get to tell you this earlier, but we have a new editor coming on board. Apparently she bought a large portion of the shares of the company, and she wants a more hands-on position here." "Who is she?" asked Alice. "Ophelia Anderson," replied Sammy. "She's a big-time fashion icon and made a name for herself with lots of different clothing brands. If you're somebody, you're probably wearing her." "Wow, you really did your homework," laughed Alice. "Nah, we just got briefed when you weren't here," laughed Sammy. As Alice sat down, she saw the bouquet and it reminded her of Oliver. "I have to go see him tonight," thought Alice. She moved the flowers to the side of her desk and looked into her handbag for her notebook that Oliver had slipped in again after she had dropped it during her scuffle. As she read through her notes, she felt somewhat betrayed and also guilty. Was any of these notes even real, or just a well-rehearsed story? The article would definitely skyrocket her career, but it would be at the expense of the truth. Alice contemplated long and hard before giving in and writing the article. The article came along nicely and told the story of a young billionaire who had made his money through a small loan he received from his already wealthy family, and used it to buy up property around the world. The article also spoke about future projects that Oliver would undertake regarding development and infrastructure in poorer countries that he had visited throughout his travels. Alice finished the article and looked at her screen. All these ideas that he spoke of, were they even real? He joked that the donation he had made of $250 million was just to get her attention, but the joke didn't seem too far off from the truth. Maybe it was the truth. Nevertheless, the article was complete and Alice felt satisfied having finished her biggest milestone within her career thus far. Chapter 14: More Answers. Alice knocked on Oliver's door and felt hesitant while waiting for someone to open. Any normal person would have stayed away and never looked back at this world, thought Alice. But no, here she stood, wanting answers. There were many things on her mind, but something that had plagued her all day besides all the reincarnation and vampire stuff was how was she healed? She remembered Trevor tending to her wounds, but it didn't seem like he was doing anything special. I have to ask him about it, she thought. As Alice went over all her questions in her head, the door opened and it was Oliver. She looked at him and saw the dark bags under his eyes as if he had not slept for days. He reeked of whiskey and cigarette and looked just about ready to die. "Alice, you came back?" "I didn't think I would," said Alice. "But there are so many things I need to know, because if what you said is true, I need to know everything about my past lives and about the world that you come from." Oliver invited Alice in, and as soon as she walked in, she noticed the empty bottles of alcohol scattered across the room. "Your place looks like SHT, said Alice. "Yeah, I've been meaning to tidy up, but I got caught up in templating the last 400 years of my life," replied Oliver. "Do you want anything though? I still have plenty of bottles stored away that Trevor doesn't know about." Oliver stumbled around to the back of the kitchen counter and bent down to grab a bottle when Alice stopped him. "No, Oliver. I think you've had enough. We need to talk, please come sit down." Oliver made his way around the counter again and sat down next to Alice. "Oliver, look at me. I need you to tell me everything, okay? Today I went to work and apparently I haven't been there in 4 days. Also, all my wounds were healed from the other night and nothing disappears that fast. The bandages were even missing. And on top of all that, I saw Helena today." Oliver looked as if he was pulled out of his drunken state and now sat up straight and was on full alert. "What do you mean you saw Helena?" asked Oliver, sounding very hesitant. "I went to the bathroom at work and when I looked in the mirror, she was looking straight at me. She looked exactly like me, Oliver. Tell me what is going on." "Alice, first I need to tell you something. The way your wounds were healed was not me or Trevor. I have no idea how that happened." "What do you mean it wasn't you? You treated my wounds, didn't you?" "Yes, we did. But Trevor does not possess any magical abilities. All he did was give you first aid. However your wounds healed, it must have been something else. Something must have happened to you within those 4 days." "I don't understand," said Alice. "Me neither," replied Oliver. "FCK Oliver. What about Helena? Is this how it starts? My terrible fate." Oliver stayed silent for long, thinking hard about how to answer Alice's complicated question. The answer should have been a simple yes, that is exactly how it starts, but Oliver was confused as to how it started so soon after they reunited this time. Her memories would normally take 6 months to come back, and Oliver didn't want to tell her that things were different, and that there was the possibility of the timeline moving up. The answer wasn't a simple yes anymore. "I don't know how to answer you, Alice, I really don't. I hate myself for not knowing. Yes, this is exactly how it starts, but for some reason the curse is different this time." "What do you mean different?" I only learnt about your existence a couple of weeks ago. I didn't know that you had been reincarnated again. Normally I would find out much sooner. I have a friend, his name is Arthur Carrick. He's known as the Immortal and he's an information broker. He knows about most things in and around the Earth realm and the realm of Albec, where the other mythical creatures reside, but even he didn't know that you had been reincarnated up until a few weeks ago, which is when he contacted me. Why is it different this time? Did you ask the Immortal? Yes, I asked him, but he didn't know, and that's what unsettles me the most. I've been trying to break this curse for 387 years, and I still haven't found anything. I'm nowhere closer to breaking it now than I was back then. FCK. What happened to Helena's mother? Can't she break the curse? Tabitha? No one knows where she is. She went missing a couple hundred years ago after attempting to kill King Leon, the previous ruler of the Greek vampire clan. She didn't succeed and after that she went into hiding. Why did she try killing him? Was it over a power struggle or something? No one knows what their relationship was or why she tried killing him. All I know is that the new ruler of the Greek vampires wants something from you. I'm not sure what it is, and until I find out, I don't think you're safe going back home. Stay here, Alice. I can't just come and stay here, Oliver. What about my job? What about my mother? I can't leave those things behind. Let me ask you this, in any of my previous lives, have I died before my memories came back? Well, no, actually. Then don't worry about my safety for now, Oliver. My memories haven't come back yet, so I should be okay. Everything is going to be fine, alright? We'll figure this out. Alice got up and kissed Oliver on the cheek and made her for the door. I'll see you soon, okay? You still owe me Chinese, said Alice. Oliver let out a small giggle. Yeah, I do. Chapter 15. Enter Ophelia. Alice left Oliver's penthouse and instead of going home, found herself making her way back to the office. She had too much on her mind but had even more things to take care of at work. Alice got to work somewhere close to 11 p.m. and checked in at the front desk before making her way up to her floor. The entire time she could not help but ask herself if Oliver even answered any of her questions, or just gave her more to think about, on top of the things she was already questioning. Regardless, she had to accept that everything was real, and that reality as she knew it, no longer existed. Alice got to her desk and started tending to her files that had accumulated over the days that she had been out of work. She didn't realize it, but she completely threw herself into her work to try and block out any thoughts of the things that she could not understand with thought of the things that she actually could. When Alice finally looked up from her work, however, she noticed that her colleagues were already coming in the next morning. She checked her clock and it was 8 a.m. Alice sat back in her chair and rubbed at her eyes when she was startled by the sound of a cup being slammed on her desk. Rise and shine, said Sammy, who had placed a tall latte in front of Alice on her desk. Alice opened her eyes and they both found it weird that this scenario looked all too familiar, but usually the roles were reversed and they both laughed. Thanks, said Alice while picking up the cup and bringing it to her lips before she noticed Sammy didn't have a coffee of her own. Was this yours? Yeah, but a few days ago I was suffering from a hangover, the likes that this world rarely sees, and you brought me one of those, so I say we're even. Alice laughed and thanked her friend, then brought the coffee once again to her lips and drank every drop. Wow, you really needed that, hey? Did you grab a drink after work last night? Nah, I went to Oliver Page. We spoke about many things, and instead of putting my mind at ease, it was racing more than ever and suddenly I found myself coming back to the office. I didn't know where else to go. Well, I think that was a good move, considering that Ophelia Anderson will be coming in today to check up on all our recent projects. What time will she be here? Asked Alice. I think they said she would be coming a bit later in the day. Perhaps it's due to the bad weather outside, I don't know. But anyways, let me get to work. Alice didn't care too much about the new editor for she had too much on her mind. Up until a few weeks ago, her only priorities were hospital bills and getting the next big scoop. She realized that ever since Oliver had showed up, she had been distracted and work didn't seem all that important anymore. However, as big as her new problems were, her old ones did still exist. She did still need and want to make a name for herself, and her mother's hospital bills were not going to pay themselves. Alice got up and walked to the bathroom but stopped right before she walked through the door. I wonder if it will happen again, Alice thought to herself. Would Helena reveal herself once more? Would she come to visit her again? Alice irritated herself with all the questions but eventually walked through the door, and went straight over to the basin in order to wash her face. Alice looked up, expecting to see Helena, but she was not there, and Alice sighed a sigh of relief before tidying herself up and making her way to her cubicle once more. Alice worked the entire day, not even stopping for lunch, and just as she saw her colleagues come in that morning, She watched as they all packed their bags getting ready to leave when Christina came out to the bullpen along with a tall slender woman, with lips as red as blood and who wore her long blonde hair down. She looked cold and unwelcoming as she looked around at all the people sitting within the bullpen before making direct eye contact with Alice. "Everyone, can I please get your attention?" asked Christina while rubbing her hands together. She looked nervous, and that was very unexpected of Christina. Perhaps it was the coldness of the person who stood next to her. For although rather beautiful, she had a feel to her that was rather unpleasant. "I know that we've been speaking about the magazine getting a new editor lately, and today I am proud to finally introduce you all to Mrs. Ophelia Anderson." Everyone greeted her, and she smiled a cold smile at everyone but again found herself locking eyes with Alice. "Good evening everyone," said Ophelia, now turning from Alice to everyone once again. "It's nice to meet you all, and let me just correct you on that, Christina," said Ophelia while turning to face Christina. "It's Ms., not Mrs. I did not have time to marry, for I have spent my life trying to build an empire that would be recognized throughout the world, and I have come here to this magazine to do no less. I will be turning this magazine into something that it never dreamed it could be. Thank you." Everyone looked seriously at Ophelia, trying to process the strong entrance she had made. She was clearly there with a goal, and with her drive it didn't seem like she would let anything stand in her way. "One more thing," said Ophelia. "I am looking for Alice Grayson." Alice first didn't respond. She felt confused. Why and how did Ophelia Anderson know of her? She tried thinking about it but suddenly felt herself being pushed to the front by Sammy. "Hi, that's me," said Alice while putting her hand out in order to introduce herself properly to her new editor. Ophelia turned to her and smiled, taking her hand and squeezing it tighter than was necessary. "I really loved your piece on Oliver page, Miss Grayson. It was very captivating and well written. Oliver is not the type of man to let any details about his life be known to the public. You must tell me your secret." "You know Mr. Page?" asked Alice, now feeling something other than confusion, fear. Oliver was not known to the world in any capacity up until a few days ago when he had made his large donation that turned the heads of even world leaders, and now this person comes in and asks about him so casually as if they had known one another for years. Also, with Oliver's past, it was safe to say that anyone who did know him probably wasn't good news either. "Yes, I know Oliver," replied Ophelia. "We go way back. Like I said, he was never a man to open up easily, so well done on the article." "You must tell me how you did it," said Ophelia as a smile grew on her face. Alice felt fear overtake her body. Oliver never brought with him any good news, but then Alice thought to herself again. She had only met Oliver a few weeks ago, but that didn't mean he didn't have a life before that. Perhaps they knew one another from the business world, seeing that they were both very successful. Her body eased up and a forced smile grew on her face. "Just hard work," replied Alice. "Well, I look forward to working with you," said Ophelia before turning and heading back to Christina's office. "Thank you," said Christina before following Ophelia back to her own office. Alice and Sammy looked on as the two ladies walked back to where they came from. "Why did Christina look so worried?" asked Sammy. "I don't know," replied Alice. "But I've come to realize that knowing Oliver Page comes with a lot of consequences." There was a knock at the door and Trevor made his way to open up, thinking that Miss Grayson might have come back to speak to Oliver, but when he opened the door, he was greeted with a hand grabbing him at the throat and lifting him off his feet. It was Ophelia. "So you must be the new servant boy," said Ophelia while watching Trevor struggle to get out of her grip. Oliver heard the scuffle and quickly ran down the stairs to see Ophelia holding Trevor like a rag doll in her hand. "Oh, hello," said Ophelia as she saw Oliver come down. She threw Trevor to the side, straight into the wall, breaking the tiles with his back. "Trevor!" shouted Oliver as he looked at his friend laying injured on the floor. Oliver listened and could still hear a heartbeat, meaning he was still alive. "Why the FCK are you here, Ophelia? Oh, Ollie, is that really how you greet an old friend? I thought for sure you would have missed me. You sent that vampire after Alice the other night. You almost f***ing made my life worse than it already is." "Well, that's exactly why I came here tonight. You see, Oliver, the other night when I sent that vampire after Alice, I sent him there to die." "What? I don't understand." "Yeah, you never do. You see, I sent him there to show you that I can easily get to Alice whenever the FCK I want. I'm here tonight to tell you how your life is about to get a whole lot worse. I'm going to let you watch your precious Helena or Alice or whatever the FCK you call her, die again. But not before I get what I want from her." "What makes you think you're walking out of here alive? You just told me your plan. I could stop it right now by snapping your neck." "Yeah, you could definitely kill me here, but I have people with eyes on Alice as we speak, and if I don't call them within the hour, they'll carry out my dying orders." I told you, Oliver, the other night was just an example of my reach. Don't f***ing test me. Ophelia walked over to Oliver as he stared blankly in her direction. She kissed him on the cheek and made her way out again, but not before turning to get in her last words. I'll see you soon, Ollie, said Ophelia as she smiled at him, and then disappeared into the darkness of the night. Chapter 16 The Invite. Alice decided to leave the house early that morning and meet up with Sammy and Brian for coffee before they all headed to work. They met at a coffee shop about a block away from work, so that the walk wouldn't be too rushed on the way to the office. What do you think of Ophelia? Asked Sammy. She's creepy is what I think, said Alice. How about you, Brian? What do you think? She looks exactly like your type. Yeah, out of his league, laughed Sammy. Ugh, Sammy. When are you going to grow up? Snapped Brian while looking at Sammy from the corner of his eyes. She is hot though. Yeah, we're sure you noticed that, said Sammy. But on the real though, what was up with Christina? She looked so scared yesterday. I wonder if she's worried about her job. What do you mean? Asked Alice. Well, we can't have two chief editors. So if Ophelia comes on, what position does Christina get moved to? Will she get demoted? I don't understand why Ophelia feels the need to even come on as an editor. Regardless, Christina will probably stay on board due to the fact that Ophelia has such a busy schedule. She probably won't be able to be in office all the time. Also, she doesn't even have an office of her own. So most of her visits will probably be spot checks or whatever. I'm sure Christina will be fine, Brain chimed in. She has been there longer than any of us. Plus, the company can't just get rid of her. She's a valuable member to the team. I hope you're right, said Alice. The elevator doors opened and three got off on their floor. Alice was the first to look up and stand in awe of what was happening in front of her. Sammy looked at Alice standing frozen next to her, and then followed her eyes to see what Alice was staring at. When Sammy looked over, she too looked on in disbelief, not even being able to talk. Brian came out of the elevator and laughed at the faces Alice and Sammy were making until he too looked at what was happening in front of them. Christina's office had been completely cleared out, and a group of building contractors were knocking down the wall in order to join it with the office next to it. I think I know why Christina looked so worried yesterday, said Sammy. Yeah, me too, replied Alice. Looks like she fixed that not having an office of her own problem. Ophelia really didn't come to mess around. Let's try not to mess around either. Apparently people are becoming easily replaceable around here. Sammy and Brian agreed and the three made their way to their cubicles. When Alice sat down, she saw a little envelope on her table. Alice examined the envelope before opening it, trying to see if she could see who it was from, but the envelope had no stickers nor writing on it. It must be from Oliver, she thought. Alice opened the envelope and found a card inside, an invitation of sorts, and it was not from Oliver, but from Ophelia. Suck it, shouted Brian from his cubicle as he stood up to parade around the office. What is happening right now? Asked Sammy, looking as confused as everyone else. Ophelia invited me to supper tonight, said Brian while cheering. Yeah, me too, Dumbus, said Sammy. Yeah, and me, said Alice, sticking her hand up with the invitation. Now sit down, you're embarrassing yourself. Sammy pushed her chair over to Alice and looked very happy and excited, confusing Alice even more than Brian, thinking Ophelia was into him. You know what these invitations mean, right? Ophelia is trying to show us that we're valuable members of the team. She probably wants to show us that our jobs are secure. That's why she's been doing all these reviews of our projects before we got to meet her. You sure that's why she wants to take us out for dinner? Asked Alice. Positive, trust me girl, we are secure. I mean, it's weird that Brian got invited too, but she probably didn't want to make it too obvious. But look at everyone else who got an invite. Jeffrey, Anna, Troy and Jason. Those are all the top guys. This has to be about our performance. Also, you just finished that big Oliver Page project and she was really impressed. This might be your chance to climb the ladder. Alice looked at Sammy and smiled, but thought to herself that all of what was happening seemed a little estranged. What was the real reason for this invitation? Christina has been fired that very morning, and now the same person who fired her was inviting the office out for cocktails. What are her motives? Chapter 17 The Dinner. When Alice and Sammy got to the restaurant, they realized that everyone from the office had already arrived, Ophelia included. When they walked in, they noticed that the tables of the restaurant had been pushed to the sides of the room, and the food was all being served as a buffet. Alice looked around and saw all her colleagues that were invited, mingling amongst themselves along with some other people that she did not recognize, probably business associates of Ophelia, Alice assumed. Hey, you guys are finally here, said Brian, walking towards them with a plate filled with savories, almost as much as he had stuffed in his mouth. Ophelia sure knows how to throw a party, am I right? Chew, swallow and then talk. It's a normal process that humans follow, Brian, said Sammy, already looking irritated with him. Come on, chill out. Grab a few drinks and get some shrimp. No ways we can afford to eat here on our salaries. He has a point, said Sammy, looking over at Alice. Alice rolled her eyes and allowed herself to be led to the bar by Sammy and Brian. The three ordered their drinks, and as they waited, Ophelia noticed Alice and Sammy and broke away from her conversation to come over and greet them. Hey, I'm glad you made it. Hello, said Alice, turning to face Ophelia. Thank you again for the invitation. It's my pleasure, said Ophelia. Actually, the reason for this little dinner party was just to clear the air about what happened this morning. This morning? Yes, with Christina leaving. She probably didn't mention anything to the team so as not to alarm anyone, but she had been planning to leave for quite some time and didn't know how to tell you. Wait, so she wasn't let go? Asked Sammy. Oh God, no, replied Ophelia. Christina was a core member of the magazine, and all the work and effort she put into the company will not be forgotten. She was actually offered a new position at another magazine in California, and didn't come in today because she had a couple of loose ends to tie up. Also, she told me she just couldn't bear to see you guys because it would tear her apart. She really cares about you. Yeah, she really does, and so do we, replied Alice. She's the one who kept us on after our internships. Myself, Sammy and Brian owe her quite a lot. I'm guessing this little dinner was your way of saying goodbye and thank you. Right you are. I have no idea where the woman of the hour is though. Hopefully she comes soon. But for now just grab a couple of drinks and enjoy the food. Sammy and Alice watched as Ophelia walked off to greet another group of executive-looking types that had walked in. Wow, so maybe we misjudged her, said Sammy while sipping at her drink. I mean, we thought she got rid of Christina, but Christina was already planning to leave and it sounds like she got a pretty nice offer. Something still doesn't add up though. What do you mean? Well, I understand Ophelia's intentions to give Christina a proper farewell, but why not invite the entire office? Look at the people she invited, it's only the top guys at the magazine. Maybe she's trying to win over anyone with any sort of influence. I think you're being a little paranoid, said Sammy. Listen, I know things have been a bit weird since this Oliver thing happened, which I still do not know the whole story to, but you have to ease up. Give her a chance, okay? Alright, fine, you have a point. Thank you, I know. Now loosen up. Alice took her drink and went out to the floor to speak with her colleagues. Everyone spoke highly about the food and wine, saying that they should savor the moment. Alice looked at all her colleagues and they all seemed to be much more relaxed than this morning about the situation with Ophelia, and she felt herself relaxing a bit as well. She had been so stressed out ever since Oliver Page had showed up that she had forgotten what it was like to be around normal people with normal problems. Maybe Ophelia did know Oliver from the business world, and maybe she didn't bring with her any dark mysteries or secrets or curses. Alice looked over and saw Sammy speaking to some guy that was invited by Ophelia from outside the office. Then she looked over at Ophelia and saw that she was speaking to Brian and another colleague of hers named Jason. Jason was very shy, so speaking to women made him very uncomfortable, and speaking to a woman that looked like Ophelia was probably enough to send him into the ER. Ophelia looked over at Alice and waved at her to come over, but Alice felt like removing herself from the crowd for a bit, and felt like sitting down and just smiled at Ophelia, telling her she felt like grabbing a seat just to rest her feet. Ophelia nodded and then continued her conversation with Brian and Jason. Alice sat for a while on her own and started to feel the exhaustion that she'd been trying to suppress for the past couple of days. She looked down at her wristwatch and saw that it was only 10 p.m., yet she felt completely drained. She then got up in search of Sammy to let her know she was leaving, seeing that Sammy could possibly have another ride home with her new friend. Alice found Sammy and assumed correctly. The two were all over one another and Alice said her goodbyes. Are you sure you're okay to leave? Asked Sammy. Yeah, don't worry about me. It's just that these late nights have been killing me. I'll see you tomorrow. Alice then went in search of Ophelia in order to thank her for the party. Christina had not arrived yet and maybe would still have come, but it was still a nice dinner and she did have a nice time and thought she could just see Christina another time. Surprisingly, when Alice found Ophelia, she was just standing with Jason and he didn't have his usual shy demeanor. Rather, he looked to be quite comfortable. The two looked like they were hitting it off. They were probably speaking about his articles on the marine conservation projects that he had been busy with and was sure to be a big piece when completed. Hey, sorry to interrupt, said Alice, feeling a little bad for killing their vibe. I just wanted to say thank you for everything tonight. Ophelia turned around and looked at Alice while placing her hand on her shoulder. Hey, why does it sound like you're leaving? It's still so early. You and I never got a chance to talk. Yes, I know, and I'm really sorry about that, replied Alice. It's just that I've had a long couple of days and the exhaustion caught up to me a bit. Hopefully we can talk another time, said Alice as she stuck out her hand to shake Ophelia's. I understand, said Ophelia. Ophelia took Alice's hand and said goodbye. She's beautiful, don't you think? Said Ophelia to Jason as the two watched Alice walk to get her things and make for the exit. Yes, she is, replied Jason. Too bad she'd never go for a guy like me. What do you mean? Asked Ophelia. Look at you, you're a catch. Let me tell you something. Ophelia leaned over to Jason and put her lips close to his ear and whispered, Don't tell Alice I told you this, but I overheard her speaking to Sammy earlier and she told her she thought you were really cute, and that she wished you'd just make a move already. She really said that? Asked Jason while looking into Ophelia's eyes as she withdrew her head. Jason's pupils were dilated and he looked as if he was staring into an abyss, for his eyes looked lifeless like that of a puppet, and that was exactly what Ophelia wanted to see, that Jason was now her puppet. Yes, she did. Be a man, Jason, go after her, said Ophelia. Maybe she won't know it, but she will want you just as much as you want her, so force yourself onto her until she gives in. Yes, that's exactly what I should do, said Jason, sounding more and more like a psychopath as Ophelia watched the seed she had planted inside him grow into something dark and sinister. Go, Jason, she's waiting for. Chapter 18 Bad Intentions. Jason came out of the restaurant and looked around trying to spot Alice, until finally his eyes fell on her on the opposite side of the road. Hey! Shouted Jason while waving, trying to get her attention, but to no avail. The sidewalks were still rather busy and cars were speeding down the road. Jason stepped into the road and dashed towards Alice, still waving at her, calling her name, until finally she saw him and looked in his direction. Jason noticed that Alice was now looking at him, and it distracted him completely as he made his way over the busy road, not even worrying to look out for oncoming cars. Jason managed to get to the opposite side of the road, avoiding any injury, but did manage to get called out by several people who had to slow down and swerve their vehicles in order to avoid knocking him. Alice looked at Jason a little confused about what she had just seen, trying to think why he would run across the road, risking his life. Hey, you okay there? Asked Alice as she looked at Jason slumped over trying to catch his breath. Yes, I'm good. Actually really glad that I caught up with you. I thought I had waited a bit too long after you left and thought I'd miss you when I got out here. But lucky for me, I managed to catch up with you in time. I've been struggling to get a taxi, said Alice. They've been driving past me this entire time and no one is stopping. It's like they don't even want my money. Hopefully I'll get one soon. But hey, what's up? What was so important that you came running over the road like a lunatic? You looked just about ready to start slow dancing with Ophelia when I last saw you, laughed Alice. No, we were just talking, laughed Jason awkwardly. I actually came over to tell you something. Really? Asked Alice. Telling me something was worth risking your life? Well, my plan was actually to catch up with you before you left the restaurant, but like I said, after watching you leave I was a little hesitant about following, but then just decided that hey, no time like the present, am I right? Sure, I guess, answered Alice, now really finding it difficult to track where this conversation was leading. Well, I've never been a guy that's ever had good luck with the ladies, most of the time they barely know I exist. But ever since you started working at the magazine, you've always been very kind to me. Well, you're a very nice person, Jason. You are very respectful and you have very good manners. You know, women like a man that can respect them. Maybe just learn to speak up a bit. I'm sure the right girl will find her way to you. Well, that's kinda why I'm here. I've always had this feeling that you were into me and wanted me to make a move. I'm sorry that I didn't realize it sooner, but I didn't think a girl that looked like you would be interested in a guy like me. Alice looked at Jason trying to process what was being said. Yes, she had smiled at him around the office, but it was not a smile that held any intentions. She was just a person that tried to have a good relationship with her colleagues. She didn't feel at all that her smile would make Jason feel like he was being led on in any sort of way. Jason, I think you might have gotten the wrong impression. You're a nice guy and all, but I'm sorry. Hey, it's okay. I know you've been trying not to say anything or drop any hints, but I know, so it's fine. Wait, what do you mean? I know that you were telling Sammy earlier at the dinner that you were hoping that I'd make a move. So it's fine, you can stop playing hard to get. Jason, are you okay? Alice looked at Jason, who now had a weird look in his eyes. His pupils dilated and she felt his stare burning into her face. He did not look like his usual self and Alice felt a slight feeling of unease as she backed up from him. Jason, I don't know who told you that, but it isn't true, I'm sorry. I actually need to get going. My mom is probably worried sick about me at home. Why not go back to the party and I'll see you at work tomorrow, okay? Alice turned to walk away from Jason to try and get a taxi a bit further up the road when she felt Jason's hand tightly grip her wrist, stopping her from leaving. Alice, stop the games. I know you want this. Jason pulled her back and tightened his grip even more, making Alice groan in pain. Alice stared at Jason. Not being able to make a sound for the unease that she had felt had now turned into shock and fear. Jason, please let go of my arm, you're hurting me. Alice felt the pain shooting up through her arm and tried wiggling herself free, but the more she struggled, the more Jason squeezed. Stop fighting your feelings, Alice. Just let go. I know you want me. Maybe you don't know it yet, but I can show you. Jason, what the FCK are you saying? Get off of me now. Alice forced her arm out of his grip and rushed backwards but did not take her eyes off of Jason. She watched as he stared at her, like a predator waiting for their prey to let their guard down. You're f***ing sick, Jason, shouted Alice. Stay the hell away from me. Alice turned and ran as fast as she could but did not let her guard down. She stuck her hand in her bag, taking out her pepper spray as she kept turning back to see if Jason was following her. But no, he just stood there, watching her until finally she managed to get to the traffic light at the end of the road where she found a taxi and took off. Chapter 19. Plans are set in motion. Jason stood on the now empty sidewalk, staring into the direction that Alice had run from him. He felt the burning feeling of wanting to confess his love and desire for her disappear. What just happened? Thought Jason to himself. Why did I just do that? Why did I just try forcing myself onto Alice? Oh no. What if she thinks I'm a bad person? She definitely does, who wouldn't after what just happened? Jason looked down at his hands and looked at them as if they were covered in filth. He tried wiping them on his pants but the dirt would not come off. I'm not a bad person, cried Jason as he wiped and wiped. He felt dirty and disgusted with himself. Jason sobbed in the empty street but didn't care if there were any people, or not because it wouldn't change how he felt on the inside. The humiliation that came with his actions would end his career, he thought. Alice would probably tell everyone he was a creep and that he forced himself onto her, ruining his reputation. How can I fix this? Maybe she won't say anything and know it was a misunderstanding? No FCK, that won't happen. Jason stood, contemplating his next move when he looked across the road and saw Ophelia standing outside the restaurant. Ophelia waved at him and Jason made his way back over the road. So how did it go? Asked Ophelia with a look of concern on her face. Why do you look like you were crying? Are you okay? I don't know what came over me, said Jason as he looked down at the ground in shame and fume led over his words. I tried speaking to Alice and at first she was really nice, but then I brought up the conversation you told me you overheard between her and Sammy, and she denied everything. I got so frustrated speaking to her about it, but she just wouldn't listen. Then I grabbed her arm and tried pulling her towards me and forcing myself onto her. She got scared and ran away. What am I going to do? What if she tells people I tried to hurt her? I didn't mean to, I don't know what came over me. I'm a good person, I'm a good person. Jason sobbed as he dropped to the ground, holding his eyes trying to stop the tears from gushing out, but they would not stop. The thought of losing his career and also the shame that would follow him for the rest of his life drove him insane, and he still could not understand why he had done what he did. Ophelia looked down at the broken man who knelt before her feet, watching as he cried, knowing how helpless he was. She smiled at her handiwork for her plans were working out perfectly, and she now had the perfect pawn to manipulate. Jason, stand up. Jason rose slowly but kept his eyes fixated at the ground. The shame he felt made his face feel heavy and he could not bear to look up at anyone. Jason, I know you're a good man. You're sweet and humble, and everyone that I spoke to at the office all spoke very highly of you. They all love you, Jason. Jason now lifted his head and looked at Ophelia as she smiled at him and wiped the tears from his face. Jason, you're still going to do great things. But how? Asked Jason. If Alice tells people what I did, then there's no way you can keep me on. I know you had big plans for me, Ms. Anderson, but I really let you down. Jason, let me ask you something. Do you care about your career and all the good work you do? Yes, of course. I get the chance to help so many lives and clean the planet and make a big impact on the world. If I lose this job, I won't be able to do that ever again. I love this job more than anything, and I would do anything to keep it. If Alice tells people, you will definitely lose your job, Jason. I think you're great, but if Alice puts a complaint on my desk tomorrow about sexual harassment, it's going to look a little suspicious if I don't do anything about it. So what should I do? You could make it so that she never gets the chance to put that complaint on my desk. I mean, she could put your whole life at risk making people think you're something you're not. In my opinion, she sounds like the bad guy. She sounds like she wants to ruin the reputation of a man who just doesn't deserve it. Yes, you're right. She is the bad guy. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a good person. She's the one planning on spreading lies about me. I won't be doing anything wrong if I try to stop her. Exactly, said Ophelia as she looked on at her creation. She watched as the black seed she planted within him corrupt his heart more and more. He was now filled with anger and jealousy and hatred. A man driven to the edge. Alice woke up the next morning and sat up in bed, still thinking about what had happened with Jason. She never felt that he was capable of doing what he did, and she couldn't help but feel frustrated that not even the normal parts of her life felt normal anymore. She looked at her wrist and the bruise that was left from Jason's grip. Why? It just doesn't make sense, Alice screamed. Alice leaned over to her beside table and picked up her phone and looked through her contacts before finding Oliver's name. I wonder if I should phone him? Alice asked herself. Although Oliver was the one who started this crazy series of events, it was still him that Alice felt she wanted to confide in. He would probably understand better than anyone. Alice dialed the number and listened to the phone ring for a time that felt like an eternity. Alice waited for Oliver to answer, but the phone just rang and Alice decided that Oliver must be preoccupied. Alice took the phone away from her face in order to put the call down, when finally she heard a voice from the side of the line, Oliver's voice. Hello, Alice? Hey, I'm sorry that I didn't pick up. I left my phone downstairs when I came up to my room earlier. I was out last night sorting out a couple of things with Trevor and I just got back. Are you okay? A part of Alice wanted to lie and say yes, but she felt like lying to Oliver and especially to herself would just make it that she would implode sooner rather than later. Hey Oliver. To tell you the truth, I am not okay. I understand that I am some sort of reincarnation, and that I am not destined to have a normal life, but FCK, it's just so hard. Please Oliver, please. Tell me this gets easier. Tell me that all the people that came before me came to a point where things just became easier to bear. The phone went silent, but Alice could still hear Oliver's breathing on the other side. He didn't know how to tell her the things she needed to hear and not the things she wanted to. Do you mind meeting me after work tonight? Asked Oliver. I can fetch you from the office and we can maybe go out. Yeah, sure, replied Alice hesitantly. She still thought of the night before, and for some reason it had left an impression on her that felt stronger than when she had been attacked by the vampire, but she agreed. I'll see you later, okay? Alice put the phone down and sobbed silently. Chapter 20, The New Boss. Alice stood in the lift with her files in hand, still trying to figure out what to do with the situation regarding Jason. He had forced himself onto her and it was unacceptable. But Alice could not get the thought out of her head that the Jason from the night before was not acting like himself. Alice felt conflicted but didn't have time to make up her mind, for she was pushed out of the lift on her floor. Alice looked around the room and saw the group that was invited to the dinner party the night before, Sammy and Brian included, still talking about the party and how much fun they had. Alice looked around in the group and didn't see Jason standing with them and felt a slight sense of relief, but did not completely let her guard down, for he could still have been somewhere within the office. Alice then turned and saw Ophelia's office was complete. All the furniture and desks had been replaced and Ophelia had all the windows tinted. Alice was amazed at how quickly they had done the renovation, but what she found even more amazing was that Ophelia was actually in her office. Alice first thought of going over to Ophelia's office before heading to the bullpen, but quickly dismissed the idea when she could not think of what to say to her. It would probably be proper etiquette to welcome Ophelia to the office, thought Alice. But at the same time, the issue with Jason was more serious and Alice was not sure how to bring that type of topic up first thing in the morning, especially on Ophelia's first day. Instead, Alice decided to make her way into the bullpen, and as she walked through the lanes of the bullpen, she was spotted by Sammy, calling over to come and join the group. Hey, for someone who left so early last night, you're getting to work rather late, said Sammy as she turned to face Alice. Hey, yeah. I just had a tough time getting out of bed this morning, said Alice with a forced giggle. Right, agreed Sammy. I mean, I wanted to leave for work, but the guy I was with made it really difficult to make me want to get up. But alas, here I am. What about you though? What kept you in bed? I need to tell you too something, said Alice as she sat down by her cubicle. Sammy and Brian broke away from the group and joined Alice at her desk. What's up? Asked Brian. Before I say anything, I need to ask you a question, Brian. Okay, sure. Was Jason acting weird with you last night at all? Did he seem off in any way? No, he was completely fine. He was mostly his usual shy self, but he managed to mingle with most of the people at the party. Why do you ask? Well, when I left last night, he followed me into the street and ran through the road, not caring if he'd be killed or not, and confessed his feelings to me. Wait, what? Gasped Sammy as she jumped back holding her chest. Just say that one more time. He did what? Brian, what do you know about this? I had no idea, said Brian, sounding confused. He's never mentioned it before. Also, that is very out of character for him. What did he say to you, Alice? Jason said that he knows I want him. He said that someone had told him that they had overheard me and Sammy talking about him, and he said that I was telling Sammy that I wish he had made a move already because I wanted him. What the FCK? Who would have told him that? Asked Sammy furiously. He didn't say, replied Alice, but as soon as I tried walking away he grabbed me by the arm, pulling me towards him. Alice unbuttoned her sleeve and lifted it up, revealing to Sammy and Brian the bruises around her arm from where she was grabbed by Jason. Sammy and Brian looked on in disbelief before Alice pulled her sleeve back down and buttoned it up again. He said I wanted him and I was just too scared to admit it and that he could show me. Show you? What the FCK does that mean? Asked Sammy. I don't know because I didn't stick around to find out. I got him off of me and bolted for a taxi in the opposite direction. Thank God you're okay, said Sammy. FCK, what a psycho. Explains why he isn't at work today. He isn't here? Asked Alice. Yeah, just relax, said Brian. What are you going to do about it? Asked Sammy. I haven't figured that part out yet, said Alice. Why? What's stopping you from doing it? What he did was completely wrong, barked Sammy. Calm down, Sammy, I know it was. But something about Jason felt off last night. He was just too different. Listen, I've had a lot of craziness in my life these past couple of weeks, so I need to figure things out before I do anything. Are you sure? I'm sure, said Alice while rubbing Sammy's arm. I'm alive, so don't worry, okay? Okay, replied Sammy. Don't worry me like that again, though. Sammy and Brian went to their cubicles when Anne, one of Alice's colleagues, came over to her. Hey, Anne, what's up? Asked Alice. Hey, Alice, Ophelia wants to see you in her office. What for? Beats me. She just told me to get you over there as soon as possible. Thanks, Anne, said Alice. Alice got up and made her way to Ophelia's office and thought about telling her about what had happened with Jason, but she also couldn't help but wonder why Ophelia wanted to see her. Alice knocked on the door and Ophelia signaled for her to open in with her hand, not raising her head down from the paperwork she was filling out. I'll be with you in a second, said Ophelia. No, it's no problem, said Alice as she stood in Ophelia's office. The room was cold because of the lack of sunlight, but the decor was extremely beautiful. Ophelia had definitely put a lot of thought into it, thought Alice to herself. Alice then looked back at Ophelia and the locked eyes as Ophelia also raised her head to look at Alice. Hello, Alice, said Ophelia as she smiled at Alice. Hello, replied Alice as she smiled back. I hope you're settling in well. I am, thank you very much, replied Ophelia. I have a couple of first-day jitters, but I think I'll get over it eventually, laughed Ophelia. But anyways, moving on to business. A very exciting article came across my table, and I was wondering if you'd like to write it. Yeah, sure, replied Alice. What's it about? It's about the Egyptian pyramids and the Aztec temples. It's basically a culture piece. No problem, boss, replied Alice. Alice first stood dead still before taking the file off of Ophelia's desk. She thought of telling Ophelia about Jason but could not bring herself to do it and eventually picked up the file and made her way out of the office, closing the door behind her. Alice stood with her back against the door and breathed in and out slowly, trying to calm herself down, and somehow made her way back to her cubicle to do her Chapter 21 Triggered Memory. Alice sat at her desk watching the cursor flicker on her monitor, trying to focus on her work, but could not stop thinking about if she should have said anything to Ophelia or not. Nonetheless, Alice forced herself to work and opened the file that she had gotten from Ophelia and started looking through the work and started digging through the information. The file contained documents regarding ancient Egypt and a possible connection to the Aztec people in South America. It held many images of the hieroglyphics within the pyramids and also images of the carvings found within the Aztec temples. Alice wondered why Ophelia would give her this article to write, as she wasn't accustomed to writing this type of content. Her work was more about investigating and interviewing people who didn't want to talk, not pieces on historical landmarks and ancient cultures. However, she didn't fight it and took it as a challenge to teach herself something new. Alice started reading through all the information and started taking notes on where she would start the article. She fell completely into her work to the point where the thought of Jason didn't even cross her mind, and she felt comfortable doing what she knew best, being a writer and journalist. Perhaps she would tell Ophelia later in the day, but for now, a distraction was what she really needed. Alice typed up the article and found it rather easy because most of the legwork had already been done. Whoever did the research for the piece really did put in the effort. The file contained dates, interviews, images from both Egypt and South America, and a lot of other documents pertaining to the topic. Alice found that she was more interested in this type of topic than she thought she would have been, and felt very passionate about writing the article. However, Alice couldn't shake the thought that everything she was reading felt very familiar. She couldn't remember where she had heard about it, but continued on with her article. As Alice typed, she felt a pain shoot through her head and she flung back into her chair, holding her hands up to hold her head. She closed her eyes tightly and tried forcing the pain out, but it would not subside. As Alice kept her eyes closed, she saw images flickering inside her head. Alice saw people standing in front of her, but the image was hazed. Alice tried focusing on the image, trying to give in to the pain rather than fight it, until suddenly, the pain stopped and Alice dropped her hands. She felt as if her spirit was being transported elsewhere, and felt herself being flung through time and space until everything stopped suddenly, and the image in front of her was now clear as day. It was her and Oliver. Alice looked on in disbelief, but remembered that Oliver had told her that this would happen, that she would start to remember her past lives. She tried not to freak out and instead tried focusing on what was happening in front of her. Alice watched as the two walked through the hallways of a temple, and she looked around and realized that the temple looked exactly like the ones in the pictures that were in the file, given to her by Ophelia. Alice looked back at her and Oliver and saw the two meet up with a group, possibly vampires. Alice watched as the group walked into a room and tried to follow, but the door was shut in front of her and she could not get it to open. Alice then felt her body being sucked up again and being flung around, until she felt herself fall into her chair. Alice opened her eyes and looked at the screen in front of her, watching as the cursor flickered by the last words she had written. She then got up and looked around her, checking to see if anyone had seen anything happen to her. But no one seemed to be looking in her direction. Alice sat back in her chair and fanned herself with some pages on her desk. Alice could not understand what could have triggered her memories to resurface, until her eyes caught a glimpse of an image lying on her desk. Alice sat up and grabbed the picture off of her desk and remembered what she saw in her memories. Alice looked up and looked directly at Ophelia's office. Alice didn't know why, but Ophelia had given her that piece to write for a reason. Alice looked at Ophelia, still going through documents, and felt a slight chill creep up her spine. Did Ophelia really know Oliver from the business world? Alice wanted to believe that, but everything else said otherwise. Alice felt maybe she needed to lie to herself because denial was easier than accepting the superstitious world that Oliver belonged to. However, she couldn't make up her mind on what to do with everything that just happened to her, and she decided to finish the article until she figured out what was happening. Chapter 22. Danger from every direction. Alice packed her bag at the end of the day but never broke eye contact with Ophelia, still sitting in her office. Who is this woman? Alice kept asking herself. What was her relationship with Oliver? Did she know about the curse, and if so, did that put Alice in danger? Alice got lost in contemplation, and was easily startled when Sammy came up from behind to greet her. Hey, I'm heading out, said Sammy. These rich guys do have the best mattresses, but there's just something about your own bed. You know? Alice laughed. Yeah, I know what you mean. Did you manage to speak to Ophelia about Jason? Asked Sammy. Alice felt nauseous hearing both those names and felt like vomiting, but fortunately managed to keep it down. I'll speak to her tomorrow, said Alice, knowing it was a lie. She had no intention of telling Ophelia what happened because at the moment, she couldn't be trusted. Okay, I'm glad you're speaking up. What are you going to do tonight? Asked Sammy. I'm seeing Oliver tonight, replied Alice. Again? Girl, every time you see this man you come to work in pieces. Why do you keep seeing him? I know you aren't the type to stick around because of a big bank account, so what is it? There's a lot I want to tell you, Sammy. I'm just trying to understand it completely myself before I let you in on it. Okay, I understand. Anyway, are you ready to go? We might as well walk out together. Yeah, let's do it, replied Alice as she smiled at Sammy and slung her bag around her shoulder. The two got outside and greeted one another with a hug and parted ways. Alice walked to the right and headed for the coffee shop that was on the next block where she and Oliver had decided to meet that night. Alice walked down the sidewalk, breathing in the crisp winter air when she passed an alley and heard a weird sound coming from it. Alice stopped and looked down the dark alley that had one working light at the end of it, far too little light to light this amount of area. Alice focused her eyes and saw movement by the trash cans that were about 15 feet away from her, too much movement for a cat to make. Alice walked towards the trash cans in order to see what was happening, and tried to make out what it was that she was approaching. Alice got to the trash cans and looked around them and was completely underwhelmed when it was just a homeless man who had made a place to sleep for the night. Alice pulled out $5 and put it under his pillow, then got up and turned around. When Alice turned around, however, she saw something that she wished she wouldn't ever have to see again: Jason. Jason stood by the entrance of the alley and looked on at Alice. Alice, paralyzed by fear, couldn't move her legs and watched as Jason walked slowly towards her until he stood a foot away from her. "Hello, Alice," said Jason. "Jason, what are you doing here?" asked Alice, struggling to get the words out. Alice was filled with fear. She wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. Jason made her feel fear that she was not used to feeling. She was filled with fear the last time he had approached her on a busy sidewalk, but now it was different. They were alone in this dark alley and Jason could do to her whatever he wanted, and no one would know. "What did you tell the people at work today about last night, Alice?" asked Jason in a calm voice. "I hope you didn't lie and tell them I tried hurting you." "No, of course not," lied Alice as the cold sweat started to run from her brow. "I didn't tell anyone anything." Alice felt unsafe and said whatever she could in order to get away from Jason. She didn't want to admit it, but by the way her body was paralyzed by fear, she knew she felt helpless. She felt more helpless against this man than against the vampire, and that scared her even more. "I actually looked for you at work today. Why didn't you come in?" "I was busy," replied Jason. "Busy? With what?" asked Alice. "I'm sure it couldn't have been more important than work." "It was for work," said Jason, now changing his tone. He sounded serious. "I was busy thinking about how important the work I do is, and how many lives I've touched through my work, and how many more lives I can still touch." "Well, that's great for you," said Alice while she forced a smile. "Yes, that is great. But there's something that is kind of endangering my vision, Alice. You see, I'm not sure I can trust you." "Trust me? What do you mean?" "I'm a little scared that our little misunderstanding from last night might come out by the wrong people, and I don't like that." "Jason, you're being silly," giggled Alice. "I know it was a misunderstanding. So come back tomorrow, okay?" Alice could finally feel her legs and tried walking around Jason when Jason sidestepped and moved in front of her once more. "I can't let you leave, Alice, I'm sorry. You'll end my career." Jason struck Alice and Alice fell to the ground, holding her face and looking up with eyes filled with fear. Alice crawled backwards as Jason stepped closer and stood over and struck her again. "You think you can just go around spreading lies about good people?" shouted Jason. "You think it's okay to ruin people's lives? You fking BT." Jason got down on his knees and put his hands around Alice's neck, trying to suffocate her. Alice grabbed at him but could not stop him and felt herself falling in and out of consciousness. Alice put her hand to Jason's face to try and scratch him, but he would not let go. Alice felt her hand slipping from his face as she could not fight anymore and gave in to her fate. Alice apologized to her mother and felt herself slipping away when the pressure around her neck released, and she gasped for air. Alice looked up and saw Sammy standing over Jason's body with a metal pipe, covered in blood, before she passed. Chapter 23, Secrets Coming to Light. Alice fluttered her eyes as she started to wake, trying to figure out where she was. The lights were bright and white and Alice realized she was back at the office. Alice coughed as she pushed herself up from the sofa and still felt the pain around her neck. Alice tried piecing together what had happened as she looked around the room before remembering Sammy. "Sammy," Alice called out, but her throat hurt and she could barely get Sammy's name out without coughing. Alice tried to look around but found it difficult to move, but then suddenly felt a hand grabbing her shoulder. Alice turned slowly and it was Sammy holding a cup of water. "Hey, are you okay?" asked Sammy, as she put the cup down on the table beside the sofa and sat down next to Alice. "Don't strain yourself, you took a couple of heavy blows." "Sammy, I'm okay thanks to you, you saved my life," said Alice. "I honestly thought I was going to die in that alley, but you came out of nowhere." "Wait, why were you even there?" "Well, when we said our goodbyes I thought I was going to be heading home. But instead, I found myself wanting to go back to the guy from last night. So I turned back and walked in your direction to get another taxi. That's when I heard the commotion in the alley, and saw Jason on top of you with his hands around your throat." Sammy started shivering as the tears rolled down her face. "I saw him hurting you, Alice. I got so mad and so scared that I picked up the pole from the ground and hit him as hard as I could and watched as the blood gushed from his head as he fell next to you. I pulled you out and just brought you back to the office." "What happened to Jason, Sammy?" "I don't know. After I got you out from under him, I saw the blood running from his head into the street, and he didn't look like he was moving. I wanted to check if he was still alive, but I panicked and ran out with you as fast as I could." "What are we going to do, Alice? What are we going to say?" Sammy looked up from the ground and didn't try to hold the tears back anymore. She felt a pain growing in her chest as the reality of what had happened sunk in deeper and deeper. Yes, she had saved Alice's life, but at the expense of another. "Sammy, you did the right thing," said Alice while trying to comfort her friend. Listen, I know that you were forced into an impossible situation, but if the roles were reversed, I would probably have done the same thing. We'll contact the authorities and tell them what happened, okay? Don't worry, everything is going to be fine. Alice hated herself for lying because she knew that everything was not fine. Jason's behavior was too random and Alice felt as if she was targeted. And although Alice was scared, she could not show Sammy her true feelings because she needed her friend to believe that everything was going to be okay. Alice tried to think of what to do next, who to call, when she thought of Oliver. He would probably know what to do, thought Alice. Alice looked for her bag and took out her phone when suddenly, Ophelia came around the corner, startling Alice. "Oh, Ophelia, what are you still doing here?" asked Alice. "I didn't expect to see you here," said Ophelia. "I just finished up on all the things I wanted to get done today, so I'm heading out." "Why are you here though? And what's wrong with Sammy?" "I was attacked outside," said Alice as she pulled down her collar to show Ophelia the bruises around her neck. "Sammy rescued me, but we're not sure what happened to the guy who attacked me." "What? Who did this?" asked Ophelia. "It was Jason," said Sammy as she stared down into the ground with tears falling from her face. She wanted to tell Ophelia what she had done and why she looked worse than Alice, but she felt as if she had something stuck in her throat and the words could not escape her. "What, Jason? But why? Did he have something against you, Alice?" "Yeah, he did," said Alice. "I wanted to tell you this morning." "What do you mean? Tell me what?" asked Ophelia. "Last night, Jason forced himself onto me after I left the party. He told me that he was really into me and that I was into him and that he knew I wanted him, which wasn't true. So when I told him that I didn't feel the same way, he lost it and forced himself onto me." "Why did he think that you had feelings for him?" "Apparently someone told him at the party that they overheard me and Sammy talking about him. But I don't know who would have lied to Hi." Alice stopped just before she ended her sentence when she looked at Ophelia, who was now staring at her. Everything made sense now and Alice felt like an idiot because it had taken her so long to figure it out, but it was plain as day. Ophelia was the last person Jason had spoken to before rushing out to her. He was completely normal before that throughout the party. That's why Brian couldn't think of a reason as to why he did what he did. "Who would have?" asked Ophelia. "You didn't finish what you were saying there, Alice." "Yeah, sorry," apologized Alice. "I was going to say, I don't know who would have lied to him." Alice saw the look in Ophelia's eye change and a smile grow on her face, as she watched Ophelia take pleasure in seeing her uncover the truth. Alice felt fear overtake her whole body as Ophelia stepped forward towards her and Sammy. Alice didn't know how to react. Sammy was still looking down at the ground, wallowing in her sadness, and obviously didn't know what was going on. Alice wanted to run, but what about her friend? Would Sammy run if she pulled her without explanation? Alice tried to think of her options, but the closer Ophelia got, the faster Alice's options ran out. Soon, Ophelia had made it all the way to Alice and Sammy and looked at them with a look of amusement on her face. She knew that Alice had nowhere to run, and even if she did, she would have to leave Sammy behind, and that just didn't suit her character. Whatever Ophelia wanted or came for, she could get here right now. Alice stood up and looked Ophelia in the eyes. She knew that over the past couple weeks or even hours, her life has been put in danger multiple times, and she never knew why. Alice thought to herself that if she really was in life-threatening danger, then at least this time she could ask her attacker, why? As the two stared one another down, the elevator at the end of the room opened and Oliver emerged. Oliver looked straight at Alice, then moved his eyes to the person in front of her, Ophelia, who was already smiling in his direction as if she knew he would come. Oliver dashed over to Alice and pulled her out of danger before turning back to face Ophelia. "Ollie, you made it," said Ophelia as her face turned red from excitement to see Oliver. "Why the FCK are you here?" demanded Oliver. Chapter 24. Plot reveal. "I asked you why the FCK are you here?" demanded Oliver. "I work here, Oliver. I should be asking you what are you doing here?" "Don't FCK with me," shouted Oliver. "Why would I FCK with you, Ollie? It's just like I told you the other night. Alice has always been within my grasp. You're the one who shouldn't be f***ing around. Did you even tell Alice about who sent that vampire the other night? Or were you too scared to say my name around her? Too scared to let her memories come back?" "What is she talking about?" asked Alice as she looked at Oliver. Oliver turned around to face Alice and for the first time, Oliver noticed the marks around her neck. "What happened?" asked Oliver as he looked up and down, trying to see if Alice had been injured anywhere else. "Did Ophelia do this to you?" "No, I was attacked on my way to you. Some guy from the office forced himself on me and tried hurting me." "What? Where is he now?" asked Oliver, now softening up as he looked at Alice's wounded neck. Are you okay? Alice nodded. Yeah, I'm okay, Oliver. Sammy found me just in time and we managed to get away. I was really hoping you'd make it out of that alley, laughed Ophelia from behind Oliver. Everyone now turned to face Ophelia, who looked completely amused at how the situation had turned out. Oliver backed up with Alice while Alice grabbed Sammy's arm and pulled her back with them as they all moved away from Ophelia, making sure not to break eye contact. Oliver, who is this lady? Asked Alice as she held onto his arm and looked on in fear at the woman who stood before them. Yeah, Oliver, who am I? Shouted Ophelia. Tell her who the FCK I am. Oliver, said Alice as she pulled his arm, making him turn to face her. Oliver looked at Alice with tears in his eyes because he had waited so long for the next reincarnation of Helena, and promised himself that if or when she did come, he would do anything to protect her. He would rather keep things from her and shelter her, rather than burden her with the truth. But he now realized that this was a mistake, and her not knowing the truth did put her in harm's way. He realized that he was so scared of losing her, that it might actually lead to him losing her. I'm so sorry, said Oliver. I should have told you everything after the night you were attacked by that vampire in the park. The truth is, the vampire who came after you was sent by Ophelia. What? Why wouldn't you tell me, Oliver? Because I was trying to protect you. Ophelia is the ruler of the Greek vampire clan, and they're extremely dangerous people. The Greek vampires have the ability to serenade men and make them do whatever they want. It's what makes them so dangerous. They manipulate pawns into doing their bidding, so that they don't have to get their hands dirty. So she sent Jason after me as well? Asked Alice, who now looked horrified at the thought that Jason was forced to do what he did. She knew that the man who attacked her wasn't Jason. It's possible, yes, replied Oliver. But what does the Greek clan want with me? Asked Alice. There are 7 vampire clans that rule within the realm of Albec, the realm where all vampires come from, interrupted Ophelia. I am in control of the strongest military force within Albec, and since taking the throne, I have expanded my empire to places that most did not think possible. But now I want more. What do you mean, more? Asked Oliver. I want it all. I want to rule over the humans. I want to do what no clan has ever had the guts to do. We are fking vampires, Oliver. We are stronger and faster than these fking insects. We do not age, we keep our strength and even become stronger over time, so why not take this world for ourselves? Is life not about survival of the fittest? Do humans not kill weaker species to eat them for sustenance? Humans only rule the world because they have evolved to become the dominant species in this realm. So is it really wrong if another species comes along and proves itself to be even more dominant than the dominant species? You will never be able to rule over this world, Ophelia. It is not the same as Albec. Here the sun shines brightly, and you know that we cannot walk in the sun, no matter how strong we are. True, replied Ophelia. But there was one of us who could. The first of our kind, King Dracula. He was the perfect being. His strength was unrivaled and he stood at the top of all races. Those stories aren't true, Ophelia. That's where you're wrong. King Leon had found evidence of his existence, but kept the evidence a secret. Instead, he only spoke about it with his head of council. I wouldn't have even known about it if I didn't overhear a conversation between them that I was not supposed to hear. They spoke about something that could change everything, Oliver. What do you mean? During one of King Leon's travels, he came across a man who bestowed upon him a vial which held the last remaining blood of King Dracula. Do you know what that means? It means that if I find this vial, and drink King Dracula's blood, I will gain the ability to walk in the sun. I will rule over my livestock here on Earth. What does any of this have to do with me? Shouted Alice. What makes you think I have it? I know you have it, Alice, smiled Ophelia. You don't remember receiving it, but in that same conversation, I heard King Leon mention something else, something that none of your other reincarnations even knew. What is it? Tell me, demanded Alice. King Leon said that he had sent the blood to a person that no one would be able to track back to him. Someone who he wished he could have made part of his life, but never got the chance to. Who was this person? Asked Oliver. Well, that's the fun part, Oliver, laughed Ophelia. It's hell. Chapter 25. Get out now. Oliver could not believe what he was hearing. He wanted to think that Ophelia was lying, but why would she? It would explain a lot. Oliver wanted to think longer on it, but realized that staying would put Alice in more danger. Oliver looked around the room and tried plotting an escape route while also checking to see if they were surrounded or not, because if so, it would be very difficult to escape with Alice and Sammy. Oliver, said Ophelia while trying to get the group's attention, I can see what you're trying to do. I'm not holding you here against your will. You may leave whenever you so choose. I am not ready to take Alice from you yet, that is why she is still alive. But believe me when I tell you, Oliver, when I am ready, there will be nothing you can do to stop me. You will have no one to turn to and you will only know despair. I'll find a way to stop you, Ophelia, replied Oliver as he took Alice by the hand and walked her and Sammy to the elevator. Alice was silent and just let Oliver pull her towards safety. She also found it difficult to believe that everything she was hearing was true. The existence of vampires was already difficult to believe, but Dracula? That was something else. Also, what about his blood? Was that part true as well? Was Helena's father really King Leon? Alice wanted answers, but as she looked up at Oliver, she could see that he knew just as much as her. Their best bet would be to get out of the office and get to a safe place so that they could piece things together. They would probably need to take Sammy with them as well, seeing as she wasn't safe anymore. Knowing what she knew, the three waited for the lift but did not drop their guard. They watched Ophelia and kept moving their heads around to check if their surroundings were clear. The doors opened and the three turned to get into the elevator, when Ophelia dashed across the room, too quickly for Oliver to react, and grabbed Sammy by the neck. Oliver and Alice turned around just to watch Ophelia snap Sammy's neck before them. Alice cried out and wanted to run towards Ophelia, but Oliver held her back, stopping her because he knew that there was nothing they could do. Sammy was dead. The two watched as Ophelia threw Sammy's body to the side like a rag doll. The elevator doors closed and Alice burst out crying while slamming her hands against the doors of the elevator. She's a f***ing monster, shouted Alice. Alice looked out at the city as Oliver drove at top speed. Oliver hated himself for what happened to Sammy because he should have been able to protect her. Oliver looked over at Alice and watched as she cried softly next to him. He felt as if he betrayed her. Sammy died so easily and she was standing right next to them. That could have been Alice, Oliver thought to himself. Ophelia wanted to prove that she could get to Alice, and she succeeded. Oliver, where are we going now? Asked Alice as she turned to face Oliver while wiping the tears from her face. Oliver turned to face Alice and saw that although she had wiped her tears, her crying was far from over. Oliver wanted to ask Alice if she was okay, but he didn't know how to start the conversation and kind of felt glad that Alice had spoken first. We're going to my penthouse, said Oliver as he turned back to look at the road. Okay, replied Alice. But we need to do one thing before we go. What is it? Asked Oliver. We need to go get my mother, said Alice. If Ophelia's plan is to get to me, my mother probably isn't safe. That's true, replied Oliver. Also, Ophelia isn't trying to operate within the shadows anymore. We don't know what to expect next from her, so we have to prepare for anything. Getting your mother and going to my penthouse is the safest thing we can do now. Alice agreed and the two drove straight to Alice's house. When they arrived, Alice took out her keys from her bag and moved them towards the lock when she noticed the door was already open. This is not supposed to be like this, whispered Alice. Let me go in first, said Oliver. Stay behind me. The two walked into the house and noticed that the table that stood by the front door had been thrown over, and all the things that were on the table were scattered all around the floor. Mom, shouted Alice, but no one replied. Wait here, okay, said Oliver. Oliver ran up the steps and checked the second floor of the house before coming down. There's no one upstairs. That can't be, replied Alice. My mom has to be here. Ophelia couldn't have been here already, could she? Alice walked around the lounge and saw that the place had been trashed. She ran out and into the kitchen and saw that the kitchen was trashed as well. The cupboards had been broken off of their hinges, the plates were all smashed and the table was against the wall. Alice ran outside and went around to the neighbors in order to see if Hale was by any of them, but no one had seen her. Alice walked back to her house where Oliver waited for her by the front gate. Ophelia has my mom, Oliver. We don't know that for sure, Alice, replied Oliver. Let's go to my penthouse and try to figure things out. No, shouted Alice. Stop doing what you're doing. You just want to get me to the penthouse to keep me safe. Do you even care about my mother or about Sammy? Don't get me wrong, Oliver, I don't blame you for her death. There was no way you knew Ophelia would pull something like that. But you have to understand that my mother is part of my life, Sammy was a part of my life. These people mean something to me. I know you love me and I know you want to keep me safe, but I need to protect my loved ones too. Will you please help me get my mother back, Oliver? I do care about your mother, Alice. I was going to look for her after I got you back to my penthouse. If Ophelia did take your mother, I know someone who might know where she's being kept. Take me with you. I don't think that's the best idea, Alice. The person I'm going to meet lives in Albeck. Will you be able to protect me? Asked Alice. Yes, but that's besides the point, replied Oliver. If you can protect me, I don't see why not. Are you sure you want to do this? Asked Oliver, sounding not too excited about the idea. Yes, I'm sure, answered Alice. Let's go to Albeck. Chapter 26. Enter Albeck. Oliver and Alice drove to the other side of town where Oliver said he knew of someone who would be able to help them find Alice's mother. However, he did say this person was in Albeck, so how were they going to get there? Wondered Alice. How does one get to Albeck? And who is this person that we are going to see? Asked Alice. There are several portals scattered across the world, answered Oliver. Each portal is guarded by a gatekeeper from a different race within Albeck. The werewolves have their portal in Norway, while the elves have their portal in Ireland. Lucky enough, our portal is right here in New York. Elves exist too? Yes, they do, replied Oliver. Elves have strong ties to the natural energy that surrounds them, and have extremely powerful magical abilities. The man we are going to see is actually an elf himself. They refer to him as the Immortal, but his name is Arthur Carrick. Why is he known as the Immortal? And what makes you think he will know where my mother is being kept? Asked Alice. He will know, answered Oliver. As a young boy, Arthur was always curious about the natural energy around him, and how to properly tap into it until he finally succeeded, and gained the ability to manipulate the natural energy inside him, granting him the ability to live forever. He also gained the ability to hear the voices of all living matter, thus giving him the ability to know what was happening anywhere in this world, and in Albeck at any given time. These days, Arthur works as an information broker and sells information to whoever can offer him something that he sees value in. Wherever your mother is, he'll be able to tell us. Oliver and Alice arrived at Millennium and looked around for Richard before spotting him behind the bar, talking to one of the bartenders who looked to be struggling with the beer dispenser. Richard, said Oliver as he and Alice approached the bar. Richard looked up and took off his spectacles and smiled at the sight of seeing Oliver. Oliver, where have you been? Asked Richard. Has the whole thing with Ophelia been resolved or what? Not even close, Richard, replied Oliver. Ophelia killed Alice's friend tonight, and she might have taken her mother too. What? Replied Richard, now moving his eyes to Alice. I'm so sorry to hear that, you, Alice. Sorry, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Richard. You and I were very close friends in your previous life. My previous life? Asked Alice. Yes, your name was Gwen Marlborough, said Richard. Did Oliver not tell you? I'm beginning to think there's a lot he didn't tell me, said Alice as she looked up at Oliver and then looked back at Richard. There's no time for that now, interrupted Oliver. We need to go to Albeck, Richard. We need to go see Arthur. Okay, yes, sorry, apologized Richard. Listen, Oliver, I don't have a problem sending you to Albeck, but are you planning on taking Alice? What do you mean? Asked Alice. Arthur is not in the bar on the other side, replied Richard. That means he's out of the safe zone of the portal's proximity. If you do go to Albeck, you'll probably have to venture out and meet him at his home in the White Forest. Are you sure you can keep Alice safe after you leave the safe zone? I don't think I can change her mind, said Oliver as he looked down at Alice, locking eyes with her. She's going. All right, said Richard. Then follow me. Richard took Oliver and Alice to the back, but first took them to his office before taking them to the portal. I thought you might need a weapon, said Richard as he pointed at the various swords and blades that stood on the wall at the far end of the room. Thank you, said Oliver as he made his way to the wall in order to look for something that might suit him. While Oliver looked for a weapon, Richard moved up closer to Alice and tugged at her arm in order to get her attention. Hey, can we speak about something you mentioned a minute ago about Oliver? Asked Richard. Sure, said Alice. You said that there's a lot of things that Oliver hides from you, and to be fair, that is true. I've known Oliver for hundreds of years, but I've known you for just as long. What do you mean? Asked Alice. Like I said earlier, you aren't the first reincarnation of Helena that I've met. The thing is, I've known many of your reincarnations. Oliver has been my friend for a very long time, and I've seen him lose you so many times, and I can't help but feel sorry for him. Trust me, the last thing Oliver wants to do is hurt you or put you in danger. I think he just believes that the less he tells you, the slower your memories will come back, and you two will have more time together. It does seem kind of selfish, but you're all he's ever had. Just trust him. I think I'm ready, Oliver called out as he walked towards Alice and Richard. Alice looked over at Oliver and saw that he wore a beautiful silver sword in its sheath on his waist, and looked ready to take on any foe that would challenge him. Then let's do it, said Richard as he turned to make his way out of his office. Richard led Oliver and Alice to the portal that stood in the freezer in the kitchen, and Alice looked at the door to the freezer as if it was a joke. Oliver looked down at Alice and felt amused at the idea that Alice had the same expression he had when seeing the door for the first time as well. Richard opened the door and Alice looked into the portal, thinking to herself that not even in her wildest dreams would she have thought that something like this was even possible. But as she stared into the portal, she did not feel an ounce of fear or hesitation. Instead, she felt ready. She had lost her best friend that night, and her mother was also missing. She was angry and wanted to do something about it. She was done feeling helpless. Alice was now prepared to do anything in order to save her mother from Ophelia. "Ophelia has taken too much from me, Oliver," said Alice. "We'll take it back," replied Oliver as he too stared into the portal. "Are you ready? Let's go." Oliver took Alice by the hand, and the two entered Albec in search of Arthur. Chapter 27. The White Forest. Oliver and Alice yet again walked through the front doors of the Millennium Bar. But this time, everything was different. Alice looked around her and blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the types of creatures that surrounded her. Oliver was not kidding. Werewolves, trolls, and elves really did exist. Something very interesting, however, that caught Alice's eye was the fact that there were humans in the bar too. "I didn't know humans lived in Albec too," said Alice as she looked at the humans in the bar, with their tattered clothes and dirty faces. All of them seemed to be starving and malnourished. "Yes, there are humans here too," replied Oliver. "However, they don't get treated too well, as you can see. This place was never made for humans to thrive. Earth would be much better for them in every way, but somehow they can't seem to leave." "How did they land up here in the first place?" asked Alice. "Vampires used to traffic humans into Albec as livestock hundreds of years ago. They would let the humans mate and build villages, and then take from their people whenever they felt like. It was like keeping them in a pen." "Oh my God," gasped Alice. "That's absolutely sick." "Yeah, it is. But we don't have time for them now," said Oliver as he grabbed onto Alice's arm and spun her around to face the exit again. "We're going this way?" asked Alice. "Didn't we just come from there?" "No, that's not how it works." Oliver and Alice walked out into the street, and the first thing Alice noticed was that the sky was dark as if it were nearing night. "Is it safe for us to be outside now at night, Oliver? Won't the vampires be walking about now? Perhaps we should wait till morning." "It's around noon here now, Alice," replied Oliver. "This is Albec." "But how can it be so dark if it's noon?" "Albec was made for magical creatures to be able to live just as normally as humans live on Earth. There is only one place where the sun shines in Albec, and it is the place that we are heading to." "What is this place?" asked Alice. "It's called the White Forest. It is a place where the trees are always covered in snow, but the nights are never cold. And even though the forest is thick with pine trees and the leaves are frozen, the sun still shines brightly due to a spell that was cast around the forest many years ago by a powerful group of mages who seek to escape the fighting and killing." "So why does Arthur live in the White Forest? Is he on the run from the vampires too?" "No, not at all. No one would dare to oppose Arthur. Arthur holds great influence within all the clans. He just enjoys the peace away from his work. Only a handful knows where he lives. Speaking of which, we better get going. We can't stay in one place for too long, and the White Forest is quite far away. We better get a horse." Oliver looked around and spotted a horse tied down outside of the bar, and checked to see if anyone was looking. When Oliver saw that no one else was outside, he signaled Alice to rush over, and the two mounted the horse and made for the forest. "The forest is about an hour away," said Oliver as the horse galloped through the sandy trails. "Also, the White Forest is enclosed by thick jungle, so we won't be able to go through with the horse. Do you think you'll be able to manage?" "I don't have a choice," answered Alice. "I need answers." "Okay, but Alice, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" asked Alice. "I can't enter the White Forest," said Oliver. "What do you mean you can't enter the White Forest?" "Because of the spell I told you about, Alice. It doesn't allow for vampires to enter. I've been trying to think about how we were going to get into the forest ever since Richard mentioned that Arthur was there. But I can't think of anything." "I'll do it, Oliver," said Alice. "No, we'll figure something else out," replied Oliver. "It's too dangerous to let you go in alone." "Listen, Oliver, we don't have any other options. I was the one who chose to come here. Maybe I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but it's too late and I'm our safest bet." "Are you sure, Alice?" "I'm sure." Oliver nodded and rode on until they came to the outskirts of the jungle. Oliver and Alice looked on and tried to see through the thick bushes, but they were hardly successful. The two got off the horse and undid the saddle before letting the horse free. Anything you want to tell me before we go in there? Asked Alice as she gulped hard while the sweat ran down from the side of her face. Yeah, replied Oliver. Chapter 28. The Dangers of the Jungle. As Alice and Oliver made their way through the jungle, Alice noticed that the jungle was much thicker than it looked from the outside, and that it was very difficult to move through it without clearing a path first. There were no trails, and the little light from the albec sky that was already quite faint became even more limited due to the thick leafy branches that hung over their heads. Alice looked over at Oliver, who looked to be scouting the area, his hand tightly gripping the hilt of the sword. How deep into the jungle is the White Forest? Asked Alice as she made her way over a big log that stood in her path. She felt relieved that she had put on flat shoes that morning, otherwise this would have been impossible. Right in the middle, replied Oliver. The mages who created the White Forest created this jungle around it as well. I'm sure you've noticed, but these trees aren't exactly normal. Put your hand on the trunk of this tree over here. Oliver directed Alice to the tree beside him, and Alice put her hand on its trunk. Alice could not believe what she was feeling. Underneath the bark on the trunk of this giant tree was a heartbeat. A steady, calm heartbeat. The trees around her were more than what they seemed, they were alive. What is their purpose? Asked Alice as she looked up to the highest point of the tree with her hand still following its pulse. Oliver came and stood next to her, placing his hand next to hers. The mages had created the White Forest in order to protect themselves from the vampires. And although that did help protect the inhabitants that took refuge, it didn't mean they were safe just yet. There were still many races like the werewolves who posed a threat to them. The mages were powerful with their magic, but they lacked in numbers and brute strength. Also, they had the disadvantage of having to take care of the people that lived within the White Forest because most of them were human, and wouldn't stand a chance in a fight against an army of werewolves. They thought long and hard on what to do when one day they finally figured it out. If they could limit the amount of forces, or at least break them into smaller groups, they would have a fighting chance. They decided to use their magic in order to create thick jungle that would put any army at a disadvantage, and also, because the trees are alive, they would be able to communicate to the mages exactly how many enemies they were, and their positioning, making it easy for the mages to wipe out large groups of their enemies. That's absolutely brilliant, said Alice. These mages must be pretty powerful. Maybe we could ask them for help against Ophelia. What do you think? Will they help us? They won't be able to, said Oliver as he took his hand off the tree and started walking again. Why not? Asked Alice as she followed Oliver back through the jungle. They've been dead for a very long time, said Oliver. The mages had magical abilities strong enough to have kept them alive forever, but they gave up their immortality the day they decided to pour all their magical power into this jungle, in order to protect their people. Not long after that, they started to rapidly age, and they died within a couple of days. So does that mean we're safe? Does that mean that this jungle will take care of us as well? Seeing that these mages poured all their magic into it in order to make it safe? Asked Alice, still seeing Oliver with his hand on his sword. No, it doesn't, replied Oliver. The jungle was created to protect the inhabitants of the forest, not the people who walk through it. These trees are filled with creatures of the night who seek to kill anyone who tries to seek refuge in the White Forest. That's why we need to move as quickly as possible. Oliver and Alice had walked for an hour when they reached a stream that needed to be crossed in order to continue. The two looked both ways in order to see if there were any fallen trees that they could use as a bridge in order to get over, but they saw nothing. How will we get over? Asked Alice. Don't worry, said Oliver. Oliver picked Alice up and hoisted her into his arms, startling and confusing her. What are you going to do, Oliver? Asked Alice, now looking nervously at Oliver. I'm going to jump, said Oliver. You're going to wah. Oliver couldn't wait for Alice to finish her sentence. He had already taken a couple of steps back in order to have a run up. Oliver dashed forward, startling Alice, causing her to close her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she felt herself flying through the air and then falling back towards the ground. Alice held onto Oliver tightly as they descended and hit the ground. Alice opened her eyes, and rather than be relieved that she was still alive, Alice was more angry that Oliver didn't warn her first before almost making her heart leap out of her throat. Oliver put Alice down and held her back as she gasped for air. You okay? Asked Oliver. Yeah, just give me a heads up next time before you try to kill me. Both Alice and Oliver laughed until Oliver heard a sound coming from the trees in front of them. Oliver stopped laughing and pulled his sword out while pushing Alice behind him. Someone is coming, said Oliver. Who is it? Asked Alice. I don't know, replied Oliver as he heard another sound coming from the branches above him. Oliver then heard the bushes to the right of him also being ruffled, and he turned his head to see the movement within the trees. Oliver and Alice stepped back with Alice still behind Oliver and Oliver holding on tightly to his sword. Oliver and Alice watched as two hooded figures emerged from the bushes, and a third jumped down from the trees above. The three men walked towards them and Oliver could see that they were vampires. "You two look like you've traveled a long way to die," said the man who stood in the center. "We're glad you came though, we haven't eaten in days." Chapter 29 Run. Oliver and Alice watched as their three attackers surrounded them. They looked into their attackers' eyes and saw the look of murderous intent. Oliver moved his head around, trying to keep track of the movements of the men around him. Oliver knew that on his own, he would be able to kill them easily, but now he was at a disadvantage. Oliver would not be able to charge anyone and keep Alice safe at the same time. Although he knew he was stronger, it was about numbers. Oliver knew that he didn't have many options, but he would need to fight until he could figure something out. Oliver's eyes moved quickly to the right as he saw one of the attackers charging at him, playing in Oliver's favor. Oliver stepped back, evading him and grabbing him by the collar, pulling him to the ground and snapping his neck. Oliver quickly turned to see another one of the vampires leaping into the air towards him. Oliver thrust his sword into the air, piercing the vampire in the heart and throwing his body to the side. The last vampire looked at Oliver and Oliver could see that he no longer looked as confident as he once did. The sweat ran from the side of his face as he looked at his comrades lying in defeat. Clearly Oliver was no ordinary vampire. Without hesitation and without even a thought of trying to save his comrades, the last vampire turned to run as he realized that he had made a grave mistake by trying to attack Oliver and Alice. As he turned, however, he quickly felt a hand grabbing him by the shoulder, stopping him from moving. "Where are you going?" asked Oliver. With one swing of his sword, Oliver decapitated the vampire who had tried to attack him and Alice. Oliver turned around breathing heavily, then rushed over to Alice who still sat on the floor, but now had a look of horror on her face. "Alice, are you okay?" asked Oliver as he knelt beside her, putting the sword on the ground and placing his hands on her arms in order to stop her from trembling. "I'm fine," said Alice. "Are they dead?" "Yes, they are," said Oliver as he helped Alice to her feet. "But we need to keep moving. I hear some voices coming from the right of us. These three must have been scouts. We need to go now." Oliver started to run while holding on to Alice's wrist, but then turned around when he felt that Alice was not moving. "Alice, what's wrong?" asked Oliver as he put his sword down and moved up closer to her. "I don't know if I made the right decision coming with you, Oliver. All of this is crazy. I just saw you murder 3 men in cold blood and I can't just flip a switch saying that what I saw was okay. I know it's too late to turn back, but I'm freaking out and I don't know what to do." Oliver pulled Alice towards him and kissed her on the forehead before withdrawing and looking deeply into her eyes. "You know, earlier when you told me you wanted to come with me here to Albeck, I became so worried and I was completely against the idea, but the truth is, and I should have told you this sooner, Helena was a fighter. I have lived countless lifetimes with you, and in each lifetime you never once showed the traits of someone who lacked strength. I don't think you made a bad decision to come with me, Alice. But listen, Alice, I need you to do something now for me, okay?" "What is it?" asked Alice. "I need you to find that strength that I know you have somewhere inside you and use it. I can hear the sounds of other vampires coming after us, and if we don't move now, we'll be trapped. Our only option is to get to the White Forest." "Okay," said Alice as she straightened herself out. "Let's go." Oliver and Alice ran through the jungle with sounds coming from every direction. Oliver knew that they were surrounded, and this time it was more than 3 vampires. This time Alice was in actual danger. As the two ran between the trees, Oliver spotted the White Forest coming up ahead, but he could also hear the enemies not too far behind. Oliver could see that although the White Forest was not far, the enemies would catch up to them before they got there. "Stop," said Oliver as he halted and knelt against a big tree. "Wait, why are we stopping?" asked Alice, sounding confused. "Did you not say that the vampires were getting closer? I can see the White Forest from here, Oliver. We can make it." "No, we won't," replied Oliver. Oliver reached behind his back and pulled out a dagger and handed it to Alice. "You need to go alone from here," said Oliver. "Take this blade. I don't know what to expect in the White Forest, but I can't go in with you and I'll feel better knowing you have this." "Wait, why?" asked Alice. "Where are you going?" "I'm staying behind, Alice," said Oliver as he still tried to catch his breath. "If we both go, there's no guarantee we'll make it. They'll probably catch up to us in no time. We stand a better chance if you go alone. Also, you know, as a vampire I cannot enter the White Forest. I'll have to make my stand out here while you find the answers you're looking for." "Oliver, I can't just leave you," said Alice as she knelt next to Oliver with tears in her eyes. How do I know you're going to be safe when I get back? What if the White Forest isn't safe either? Oliver, I can't do this. You have to, Alice, said Oliver. You came here for answers. We've done way too much to get to this point to leave without them. Maybe Arthur will know of a way that we can stop Ophelia. There's too much at stake for us not to take the risk. Now please run as fast as you can. I'll fend off these vampires and I'll be waiting for you when you get back. Okay, said Alice. But promise me you'll be okay. I promise, said Oliver. Oliver got up with Alice and kissed her deeply before watching her running off into the direction of the White Forest. When Oliver turned around, the enemy already awaited him. Oliver put his hands on the hilt of the sword, and looked around at the enemies that surrounded him with a smile on his face. Why are you smiling? Asked one of the vampires. Yeah, we're about to f***ing kill you for what you did to our brothers, said another. I'm smiling for many reasons, answered Oliver. You see, I've been so stressed lately and I haven't had anything, or anyone to take that stress out on. So I'm really glad that my girlfriend is finally safe and not here, because I wouldn't want her to see how I'm about to kill. Chapter 30. What power? Alice stood on the borderline that separated the thick jungle she had just emerged from, and the white forest that stood before her with its white leaf trees and branches that pointed to the skies. Alice stuck out her arm and put it into the light of the white forest and knew instantly there was something strange, something different about this place. Alice immersed herself into the white light of the forest and felt her body being warmed by the rays of what seemed to be a sun, but she could not see one. All she knew was that the forest brought her immense comfort, and somehow, all the things that had felt so heavy on her chest suddenly lifted itself off of her. What is this place? Thought Alice to herself. Is this the natural energy that Oliver spoke of? Why am I feeling it so strongly? I can feel it coursing through my veins. The euphoria is unimaginable. As Alice tapped into the energy around her, she quickly found herself blacking out and waking up instantly. Alice fluttered her eyes and looked around her, seeing that her surroundings had changed and she was no longer in the white forest. Rather, she stood in a small cottage that looked to be quite old and broken down. This must be another memory, said Alice. Alice, however, did not freak out or lose her cool. The process of her memories returning had become easier to bear, and she now had better control of when it happened. Alice looked around her and saw a little window to the left of her. Alice walked over and saw that the meadows stretched on for miles till they met with the mountains. Alice looked up into the bright sky and wondered if this memory was taking place on Earth or in Albeck. Alice turned around and walked to the kitchen table when she heard a loud bang and realized someone had walked into the cottage. No two people. Please, mother, please let me go, I love him, said one of the voices. No, you will not leave with that boy, replied the other voice. Listen, Mom, I love him, okay, and all my life you've tried to control me, but I can't do it anymore. I came to ask for your blessing, but you'll never give it to me. Tomorrow morning at sunrise, I'm leaving with Oliver. Alice stood in the kitchen listening on. She couldn't see the faces of the people who were talking, but she didn't have to. She knew what memory this was. Maybe the most important one because it was the one that started everything. Alice listened closely so as not to miss a single word because this memory was so significant. There was a chance that it held answers that maybe not even the immortal would be able to give her. Alice heard the sound of Helena's mother hitting her. Alice moved closer and saw Helena lying on the ground holding her cheek. Her mother stood with her back towards Alice so Alice could not see her face, but Alice watched as Helena's mother stood over her, breathing heavily before pulling Helena back to her feet. You are not leaving this house, shouted Helena's mother as she struck Helena again, but not hard enough for her to fall to the floor. You know what I am capable of, do not test me. There is nowhere you can run that I will not find you, so make it easy on yourself and don't bother trying. Your power might exceed mine, but you still have no idea how to control it. Her power, thought Alice. What did she mean by that? Alice tried contemplating on what she was hearing when she felt herself black out again, and found herself standing once again in the white forest. Alice looked around her and through the trees to see if anyone was close by, but she was alone. Alice breathed in and out, then tried to focus. What caused her to have a memory at that moment? What triggered it? And more importantly, what power was Helena's mother referring to? It was the first that Alice had heard of this. Power? What power? Alice wanted to know more. Alice thought of why Oliver wouldn't have told her about this power. Perhaps he didn't know about it. Alice still had so many questions, but now wasn't the time to stand still. She needed to move. Chapter 31. I found you. Alice wanted to process everything, but she knew she had no time. Arthur had to be found and Oliver's life was at risk. Alice checked the back of her pants where she had put the blade that Oliver had given her, and made sure it was still there. Sure enough, it was. Alice now felt confident and she started to dash through the trees of the forest with snow up to her ankles. The snow did not feel like regular snow though. It felt lighter and did not weigh her down as she ran through the pines. Alice eventually arrived at the village and was surprised that the village was much bigger than she had expected. The village looked more like a town and reminded her of how the streets looked when she had first exited the Millennium Bar and saw Albeck for the first time. Alice looked at the village and felt somewhat confused that the village did not lie deeper within the forest. Maybe it was because the light of the forest acted as enough of a protection on its own, that the villagers did not bother to venture further into the forest when first arriving. Alice walked through the streets of the village and felt completely out of place, and the fact that everyone was staring at her did not make it easier. Her clothing made her stand out, and standing out was the last thing she needed right now. Alice looked around her as she walked, trying to think of who to ask of the immortal's whereabouts, but saw that people kept their distance from her. "I'm never going to find him if no one wants to speak to me," said Alice. Alice walked up to multiple people, asking and pleading with them to help her find Arthur Carrick, but no one would help her. Alice, however, kept on going and found herself entering a sort of tavern. Alice looked around her and thought of who looked like the best person to speak to when her eyes fell on the bartender. He would probably know something, Alice thought to herself. Alice approached the bar when a man stepped in front of her, blocking her way. Alice tried walking around him, but he moved in front of her again. "Excuse me, miss," said the man as he smiled at Alice. The man was big-built and looked to be in 30s. His beard covered up most of his face while the cloak he wore looked rugged and dirty. "I hear you're looking for the immortal. I know where he is. I can take you to him." "Really?" asked Alice. "Thank you so much. No one has even wanted to look in my direction since I got here." "Yeah, people around here don't really like outsiders," replied the man, "but hey, I don't mind helping you out. Come with me." "Thank you," said Alice as she smiled and followed the man out of the tavern. While walking down the street, Alice realized she didn't ask the man what his name was and turned to face him. When she looked over, however, his expression from the tavern had changed and he pushed Alice to the floor. Alice fell hard, hurting her hip but not taking her eyes off of the man who stood over her. "You people from the other world always think you're better than us. You think we want to live here, huh? We didn't choose this life." The man kicked Alice while she laid on the ground and Alice felt the pain course through her entire body. The memories of what happened with Jason started flashing in her head, and she remembered how helpless she felt in that moment, and Alice hated it. Alice got up and pulled out the blade that Oliver had given her and thrust it, piercing the man's shoulder. Alice pushed the blade deeper into his shoulder till she could see the blood squirting from the wound. Alice pushed for dear life, trying to injure the man enough to be able to get away from him, but just as she thought she had the upper hand, the man lifted his leg and kicked Alice back down. The man took the blade from his shoulder and threw it on the floor while moaning in agony. "I'm going to f***ing kill you," shouted the man as he ran to Alice and started beating her. Alice covered herself as best she could, but the man was much bigger than her, and even though he couldn't use one of his arms, he could still overpower her. Alice tried fighting back, but she couldn't get the man off of her. She felt scared and didn't know what to do. She felt the fear build inside her as she believed her life was about to end. As Alice kept up her arms to protect her face, one of the man's punches broke through her guard, hitting her in the jaw. The pain was unbearable and Alice felt herself going in and out of consciousness, when suddenly, the pain evaporated and Alice's blood started to boil. Alice felt something strange happening inside of her, something familiar. Alice felt power surging through her veins and felt the same feeling of euphoria she had felt when she first walked into the White Forest. Alice stood up and looked at her arms and watched as the wounds healed themselves. Alice felt the natural energy caressing her skin as the marks faded in front of her very eyes. The man who attacked her watched on as Alice's eyes turned yellow and shined as brightly as the full moon. "Who is this woman?" thought the man as he backed up. He thought of running away, but he also wanted to finish what he started. The man charged at Alice and Alice stopped his movements just by looking at him. He could not move and Alice looked as he stood paralyzed in front of her. She could not understand where this power had come from, but she wanted to take advantage of it. Alice hit the man several times as he watched helplessly, feeling every blow. Alice hit him till she could no more than walked backwards, breathing heavily. Alice felt the power inside her fluctuating and Alice realized that she was losing control. Alice looked up and saw that the man had regained some movement and Alice felt that it wouldn't be long till he broke free. Alice watched on as the man slowly came towards her while his movements gradually became faster. "You should have killed me," said the man as he glared at her. The man now stood over Alice, and Alice threw her hands up to protect herself again when suddenly, a man in a black suit and a fedora stepped behind the attacker and snapped his neck. The man's body dropped to the floor, and the man stepped over the corpse as if it was nothing and walked over to Alice and put his hand out to help her up. "I am so sorry, Alice, Oliver is going to kill me," said the man. "How do you know my name?" asked Alice. "Well, I'm Arthur. Aren't you here to—" Chapter 32 Arthur Carrick. Arthur opened the door to his home and helped Alice inside as she trembled in his arms. Arthur let go of Alice and first took off his coat and hat and hung it up before leading her down the passage and towards the kitchen. "Please sit," said Arthur as he walked over to the cabinet to take out a jar of tea bags. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been out all day and I've been dying for a cup of tea. Would you like some?" Alice shook her head while she watched Arthur move around the kitchen with a smile on his face. He didn't look the least bit bothered about anything. Did he not just kill a man? Did he not just see me almost get killed? Did he see the power that came out of her? Why did he seem so untethered, so calm, so carefree? "We don't have time for tea," said Alice as she struggled to get the words out. "Oliver is outside on the perimeter of the White Forest, fighting a small army of vampires. I told him I would try and make it out as quickly as possible. I need to get to him, but first I came here for answers." "Trust me, the tea will help," said Arthur as he put the cup of tea in front of Alice. "If it makes you feel any better, I got it on Earth. The tea here in Albeck is SHT. Alice could not believe that Arthur had not listened to a word she had said, and had still made her the cup of tea she had not wanted. Alice looked at Arthur as he stood leaning against the kitchen counter, waiting for Alice to take a sip. Alice picked up the cup and brought it to her lips, taking a sip, and felt the warm liquid course its way through her body and warmed her insides, calming her down. "What's in this?" asked Alice as she looked up at Arthur, who had a smile on his face. "It's just regular tea," replied Arthur with a laugh. "However, I infused it with some of my natural energy. That's what's calming you down. But you already know about natural energy, don't you?" giggled Arthur. "I saw you using it earlier against that guy who was attacking you. And by the way, Oliver is doing just fine." "How do you know Oliver is fine?" asked Alice. "And what was that power that I used?" "I am the immortal and I see everything," said Arthur. "Do not worry about Oliver. He is much stronger than the vampires that lurk around in these jungles. Most of them are not very strong. That's why they have to camp out in these jungles in order to catch their prey as people venture to the White Forest looking for refuge. Besides, Oliver probably didn't tell you this because he's never been allowed into the White Forest, but time moves differently here. For every minute that passes outside of the White Forest, an hour would have passed here. As for the power you displayed earlier, that's a long story. So when I leave here, only a few minutes will have passed where Oliver is right now?" asked Alice. "Yes," replied Arthur. "That means that we can speak for as long as you want, because trust me, the more you find out, the more questions you'll have." Arthur sat down and put an ashtray on the table while lighting a cigarette, blowing the smoke up into the air. "What do you mean?" asked Alice. "You're here to ask about your mother, right?" "Yes, I am. I think that Ophelia might have kidnapped her, and is keeping her prisoner till I give her what she wants." "Which is the blood of the Dracula," said Arthur, now changing his tone and facial expression as he looked away, still smoking his cigarette. "Yes," replied Alice. "So where is my mother being kept? If we can rescue her now, we might be able to decrease the leverage Ophelia has over us. Please, you have to help us." "Ophelia might not have your mother," said Arthur as he looked into the distance, blowing smoke from into the air above him. "What do you mean? It has to be her." "What makes you think it isn't her?" Alice protested. "It's because I don't know where your mother is, Alice. If Ophelia did have her, I would be able to find her. Even if she did have a type of mage or witch helping her cloak your mother's whereabouts, I would still have gotten some sort of reading." "If it wasn't Ophelia, who was it?" asked Alice, now becoming frustrated. "I don't know," said Arthur, looking down at the table as he killed the cigarette. "I can tell you this though, whoever has her is an even bigger threat than Ophelia." "How so?" "Well, if this person is strong enough to hide your mother from me, then they must be powerful. All I can say is, as big of a threat Ophelia poses, so does the person who has your mother." "So what do we do?" asked Alice. "Ophelia wants the blood from you, right? So let her come to you. Until then, learn to harness the power you have inside of you. Tell me, what was the first thing you felt when you stepped into the White Forest?" "I felt the natural energy," said Alice. "But why? Are humans able to feel natural energy?" "No, they aren't," said Arthur. "The fact that you can feel natural energy means you aren't exactly human. The only people who can tap into natural energy are the elves and the mages. Maybe that's why. That's why what? Asked Alice. What do you mean I'm not exactly human? Do you know who Tabitha is, Alice? No, should I? Asked Alice. Yes, you should, replied Arthur. She was Helena's mother, and also one of the strongest mages to ever exist. It's possible that her magical abilities could have transferred over to Helena, and you're able to tap into that same power. Chapter 33. The Blood of a Mage. Arthur was right. Alice did have more questions than answers. She still didn't know if or if not Ophelia had her mother, and what's worse was if she didn't, that would mean the potential of an even greater threat. As for the possibility of Helena's mother's powers transferring over to her, Alice had no doubt that this was true. Alice remembered the first moment she had stepped into the White Forest, and the memory that was unlocked when she entered. Her mother had clearly mentioned that Helena did possess power, but it had not been unlocked yet. Arthur, can I ask you something? Asked Alice. You may, replied Arthur. Alice first thought to herself how she would phrase the question, seeing that even she didn't exactly know what she was asking. Did you know any of my other reincarnations? Asked Alice. I did, replied Arthur. Why do you ask? Well, I was wondering, did any of them show signs of a connection to the natural energy? No, they didn't, said Arthur. None of them did. I don't ever recall any of them using or tapping into the natural energy, even though they were reincarnations just like you. What does that mean? Asked Alice. I don't know, Alice, but you're different. Different from the rest of the reincarnations. Why do you say that like you know something else? Asked Alice while detecting that Arthur was not telling the full truth. Arthur got up and walked over to the window while slipping his hands into his pockets. He looked out at the snow that covered the grounds of his yard. He then turned back and looked back at Alice while crossing his arms and leaning up against the table. Oliver and I knew there was something different about you ever since we found out you were reincarnated, said Arthur. What do you mean? How did you know? Asked Alice. Well, I don't know if Oliver told you this, but I am the one who told him that you had been reincarnated. The thing is that the period between your previous reincarnation and when you were born was much longer than any previous period, meaning there was something strange about it. And you don't know what it is? Asked Alice. Unfortunately not, replied Arthur. However, I'm starting to think that there's more to your curse than we previously believed. I don't think it's as simple as Tabitha just wanting to hurt Oliver. I'm starting to think that it's about something completely different. What makes you say that? Asked Alice. I'll tell you in a moment, I just need to ask you something first. What is it? Asked Alice as she felt a little caught off guard. What memory did you have when you entered the White Forest? Asked Arthur. How did you know about that? Asked Alice, feeling completely stunned. She had not told him about it, but she had been thinking about it. Maybe he could read minds too? Alice didn't know. I felt a surge in the natural energy when you first walked into the forest, answered Arthur. These surges happen when there are spontaneous spikes within the natural energy in the forest. You created one when you tapped into your memories. Alice couldn't explain it, but she kind of knew of what Arthur was trying to say. Even before the memory had kicked in, she had the natural energy fill her body and fill her with powers she had later used against her attacker. Alice remembered that in that moment when she had tapped into her power, the moment she had restricted her attacker's movements, she also did something else. Something that brought a lot into perspective. She had healed herself. Alice thought back to the morning when she woke up after the attack in the park. She remembered how when she checked for the wounds, they had been completely healed, putting her into a state of complete doubt. But now it made complete sense. Somehow she had tapped into this power while she slept, healing her own wounds. I saw Helena, said Alice finally. Which Helena did you see? Asked Arthur. Which lifetime? Her. I mean my first life, said Alice. I saw the moment when Helena had gone to ask Tabitha for permission to leave with Oliver. She obviously didn't get it and still ran away. However, Tabitha did mention that Helena had powers that could exceed her own one day. Arthur looked at Alice, now being the one with the look of shock on his face. Could it be possible that Helena had power that rivaled even Tabitha? Or even exceeded it? Because if so, then there definitely was more to the curse than previously thought. Or maybe, just maybe, the curse had been interpreted wrong this entire time and the curse was always meant for something. Chapter 34. The Monster Within. Alice, I think you should stay here in the White Forest for a little while longer, said Arthur as he walked back to the table to sit down. No, I can't, said Alice. Oliver is waiting for me outside. I left him out there with all those vampires. I don't care how strong you think he is, Arthur. There is no way he can survive out there alone. Trust me, Alice, Oliver will be fine, replied Arthur. And besides, you staying here will help him much more than if you go now. Why? Asked Alice. Because I'm going to teach you how to tap into the natural energy. Oliver thrust his sword forward, killing the vampire that rushed him, then ducked as another ran towards him from the opposite direction. Oliver looked around at his surroundings and saw dozens of eyes watching him, circling him, looking for an opening, but Oliver did not have any. Oliver had already killed almost a dozen of their men in the few minutes that they had been fighting, and did not look as if he had even broken a sweat. However, the vampires did not show any signs of retreating and started to close in on Oliver from every direction. Yes, they knew he was much stronger and much faster than him, but there was no way he could keep up with how many of them they were, and even if he could, fatigue would start to wear him down. Oliver, however, did not seem stressed about any of these things. He didn't think of the number of enemies, nor did he think he was going to lose. The difference in power was far too great. Their movements seemed slow, and their attacks felt light. It was only a matter of time till Oliver killed them all. Oliver turned around to see the attackers charging at him. Oliver quickly turned around and jumped over them while ramming his sword into the skull of one of the attackers. Oliver pulled the sword out of his head and then quickly cut the other two vampires across their backs, watching all three of them fall to the ground. Oliver looked up and looked directly in the eyes of the man who seemed to be their leader. Are you just going to stand there and send your men to die? Or are you going to come over and do something about it? Shouted Oliver. All of you are f***ing cowards, and you know what? You're the biggest f***ing coward of them all. Look at you hiding behind your men. Why don't you stop throwing their lives away, and fight me yourself? Oliver watched as the heads of the vampires shifted from him to their leader, who stood with a smile on his face and his arms crossed. Why should I fight? Why? Before the vampire could even finish his sentence, Oliver had dashed over to him, ripping out his throat, and stood over his lifeless body, holding the throat in the air. Is there anyone else? Shouted Oliver. The vampires now moved away from Oliver and slowly retreated back into the jungle, making sure not to turn their backs on Oliver before knowing they were safe to run away. Oliver threw the bloody piece of flesh to the side and wiped the blood from his hands off on the shirt of the body that lied at his feet. When he stood back up, he looked over at the white forest and saw two shadows in the distance. What is that? Thought Oliver as he walked towards the white forest, gripping the hilt of his sword tightly. Oliver looked into the bright light and felt the heat emanating from the sun, making it difficult for him to get too close. He watched as the shadows became outlines of people, and eventually he saw that it was Alice along with Arthur. Oliver felt confused. There was no way that Alice could have searched for Arthur and spoken to him in such a short period of time. Did Arthur not want to speak to her? Was that it? Nevertheless, she was back and Arthur was here too. And if Arthur wouldn't speak to Alice, he would definitely speak to him. Alice emerged from the forest first with a smile on her face, happy to see that Oliver was safe, when suddenly she stopped, and could not believe her eyes. The ground was scattered with bodies and Oliver stood covered in blood from head to toe. What did he have to do to give me that time? Thought Alice as the tears rolled down from her face. Was he really ready to throw away his life in order to give me a chance to find my mother? Alice stopped thinking and ran to Oliver, throwing herself into his arms and kissing him, grabbing him, holding him so tightly as if she was afraid to let go. He loved her and she loved him. And as they kissed, Alice promised herself that she would no longer be a burden in this fight against Ophelia or whoever came next. She would fight alongside Oliver. As the two pulled away, Alice smiled at Oliver and leaned in to kiss him again. Let's go home, okay? Said Alice. We're done here. Are you sure? Asked Oliver. You were barely in there. Time works differently inside the White Forest, said Alice. A minute outside of the White Forest is an hour inside the White Forest. I was there for almost 2 days and a lot has happened. Did it take you that long to find Arthur? And also, are you not hungry? How did you survive for 2 days? I'm fine, Oliver, said Alice. Arthur found me quite early yesterday, well earlier, after I was getting attacked by someone from the village. What do you mean you're fine? Asked Oliver. You just told me you got attacked, so how can you be fine? What did they do to you? I managed to stop the guy from hurting me, Oliver, and also I healed my own wounds. Do you remember when I was attacked by that vampire in Central Park, and I didn't know what happened to the wounds? Well, I healed them. Somehow I'm able to tap into the natural energy. What do you mean? I don't understand, said Oliver. I didn't understand at first either, replied Alice. But don't worry, Oliver, I'm fine. I'll tell you about everything when we get home. Okay? I just want to get out of here. Okay, my love, said Oliver. Let's go. Oliver looked up at Arthur, who stood leaning against a tree, smoking a cigarette on the outskirts of the White Forest. Oliver nodded at Arthur, and Arthur waved back before turning and walking into the white of the forest and disappearing. Chapter 35. Inevitable Attraction. Oliver and Alice stumbled through the door of the penthouse just before the break of dawn, trying their best to avoid the sun. When they had returned from Albeck, Richard had offered them sanctuary till the day had passed, but Oliver had declined the offer and said that he would prefer to go home. The two walked into the penthouse, holding one another upright till they got to the lounge and fell to the floor in front of the fireplace. "You said you had something to tell me," said Oliver as he stared blankly into the fireplace. He felt weakened by the light of day and was not used to being awake at this time, but he needed to know what Alice had found out. "I found out a lot, Oliver, and I think that whatever we thought we knew about this curse might be wrong." "What do you mean?" asked Oliver. "What do you mean wrong?" "Well, for starters, did you know that Helena had magical abilities?" asked Alice. "No, I didn't," replied Oliver. "She never told me. But what does that have to do with anything?" "The power was passed down to me, Oliver," said Alice. "When I walked into the White Forest, I had one of my memories come back. And it wasn't just any memory." "What do you mean? What did you see?" asked Oliver. "It was the night I went to ask Tabitha if I could leave with you," said Alice. Oliver looked at Alice in a look of complete disbelief that confused her. "Why is he looking at me like that?" thought Alice to herself. "Alice," said Oliver after a long pause of silence, "I don't know if Arthur told you this, but I've asked every reincarnation of Helena if they could remember that night, but they couldn't. For some reason I always thought that night held so many unanswered questions, and now finally, here you are remembering it." "What happened?" asked Oliver with a slither of hope in his voice. "What happened the night before this started?" Alice told Oliver everything, and Oliver realized that not only was there still a lot to learn about the curse, but also, Helena had kept her magical abilities a secret. Why? And what did Tabitha mean by Helena becoming stronger one day? Was that it? Oliver thought to himself. "Do you have any control of the power now?" asked Oliver. "Somewhat," replied Alice. "I can just barely tap into the power here on Earth, whereas in Albeck the natural energy was much stronger. I'm not completely useless though. Let me see the wound you've been keeping from me since we got back from Albeck." "How did you know about that?" asked Oliver. "Well, I do have eyes, you know," said Alice as she pulled Oliver's shirt off to look at the wound. The cut was deep and Alice could not understand how Oliver was even still standing, let alone breathing. Alice put her hand to the wound and concentrated natural energy onto it, watching as the wound started healing itself. Oliver looked on in disbelief because he had never seen such powerful healing magic ever before. Alice said that she was only barely able to tap into the natural energy here on Earth. And come to think of it, she had only unlocked the power now, so what was her true potential? If Tabitha herself said that Helena would one day become more powerful than her, then what did that mean for Alice? After Alice was done, the wound looked as if it had never been there. The skin had pulled itself together and the missing tissue had been replaced. "Are you okay?" asked Alice, staring into his eyes while rubbing her hand across his chest. Oliver, clenching his jaws, said, "Yeah, I'm great actually." Alice rubbed her hands over the place where the wound had been and then moved them back up to Oliver's chest, caressing his skin. Oliver followed Alice's hands with his eyes as she moved them across his body slowly, her eyes locked on his skin. He placed his hand under her chin and lifted her gaze to meet his. Oliver grabbed her waist and pulled her towards him. As he kissed her, Alice wrapped her arms around his shoulders, pressing her breasts firmly against his chest. She slipped her tongue into his mouth and suddenly, Oliver turned his face away. "What's the matter?" asked Alice. My fangs. I don't want you to see me like this, not in this moment." Alice placed her hand under his chin and turned his face towards her. She stepped forward, keeping her eyes locked on his. She gazed down at his fangs, and when she looked up, Oliver saw her eyes beaming bright yellow. They stood in Oliver's bedroom, staring at each other. Alice's imples pointed up as Oliver circled his thumb along the light brown rose-shaped skin around her imples. She felt the velvet tip of his knives touch her inner thigh. She wondered what vampires tasted like. Alice took Oliver's hand and led him to the bed, where she sat at the edge with him standing before her. She looked up into his eyes before taking him into her mouth. Oliver threw his head back as Alice moved her tongue along his shaft, before taking him into her mouth again. Oliver grabbed her hair and gently lifted her to stand up. He picked her up and placed her on her back. Smiling at her, Oliver buried his face between her thighs. Alice arched her back, moaning as Oliver twirled his tongue around her clt. She pulled him up to kiss her, and as their lips pressed together, Oliver pushed himself inside of her. Gasping, Alice grabbed hold of him while their bodies rocked back and forth. Chapter 36. Taking charge. Alice awoke to see the beams of sun entering the room from all sides. The sun felt warm and comforting, and it made Alice feel energized as she bathed in its rays. Alice then looked over at Oliver, who was still sleeping, and thought to herself when last she had seen him so relaxed. Ever since she had found out about the curse, Oliver had changed and seemed to be on edge. Alice got out of bed still naked, and walked over to the window that overlooked the New York Bay. The penthouse was extremely high up, so there was no chance of her being seen. Alice sat down in front of the window, looking out at the world, and thought of everything that had happened in the past few weeks, and how everything had changed so quickly. Before all of this, she had just been a regular journalist who had to fight her way through school because of financial difficulties, someone dealing with regular people's problems. But that was no longer her, that wasn't her life anymore. Or at least whatever little life she had left. Her memories of Helena had started returning more frequently, and even now, just before waking up, another memory had returned. Alice wept silently at the thought of dying. She was scared and she couldn't help it. Alice looked over her shoulder and watched Oliver as she thought of how hard it would be to lose him again. Yes, again, because that's what she had seen in her memory. She dreamt of dying in Oliver's arms. She felt his tears hitting her face as her own ran down into his hands as he held her. It must have been hard for him too, Alice thought to herself. I just got born again and got to live most every lifetime with a man who loved me from the very second he saw me again, but he never got that. Oliver kept on living, and has been carrying around all of that loss for hundreds of years. This curse has to come to an end. Alice thought back to what Ophelia had said about King Dracula's blood, and that she had planned to use it to cast a spell, giving her the ability to walk in the sun. When Alice was in the White Forest, Alice had asked Arthur about the spell, and he said the spell was meant to give you the mark of life. The mark would be able to give its user a new life, a better one. For vampires, it would give them the ability to walk in the sun. Maybe that's the gift I can give Oliver. All these years he has had to live his life in the shadows. The only places he could be safe were places like his penthouse, where he told me that he had gotten a special tint on the windows that didn't allow the harmful rays from the sun to enter, but at least he could still look at the sun. He was so satisfied even through all of the struggles, and it killed her just thinking about it. She hated that he was satisfied with it. He was locked in this cage made up of his immortality and constant loss. He was so far gone, and it killed Alice to think of how many times Oliver had died inside before he became numb, and just started living for the hopes of seeing her again in the next lifetime. Alice decided that enough was enough. Ophelia knew more about the blood than anyone else, even Arthur. Also, she might know where her mother was. The best time to go to her would be now, during the day. Ophelia probably had the same tint on her office windows, but that meant she wouldn't be able to leave her office, putting her at a disadvantage. If anything did go wrong, she could just step out of the office and Ophelia wouldn't be able to follow her. Alice felt confident in her plan and also in her power. She could now use natural energy, and Ophelia didn't know this. She had a way to protect herself, and she didn't need Oliver. She wanted to end this on her own. I have to get the blood before Ophelia, said Alice as she stood up and got dressed. Oliver cannot go on living like this. How many more 100 years does he have to watch me die? Alice sat down on the bed and put on her shoes before getting up and kissing Oliver and exiting the room. As she made her way down the stairs, she heard a sound coming from the kitchen. When Alice got downstairs, she was happy to see that it was Trevor, who looked to be making breakfast, or lunch judging by the time. Good afternoon, Miss Grayson, said Trevor as he threw the chopped vegetables into the pan. Hello, Trevor, said Alice. It's been a while. How have you been? My back still hurts a bit, but it's nothing to fuss over, said Trevor as he smiled and pulled out a seat for Alice by the kitchen counter. Please allow me to make you something to eat before you leave. Alice found it strange that Trevor was well aware that she was leaving, but did not look as if he planned on stopping her. But although Alice thought it strange, she accepted his offer and sat down. Would you like green pepper in your omelet? Asked Trevor as he stood with his back facing Alice and leaned over the stove, throwing salt into the pan. Yes, please, replied Alice. Trevor made all the food and placed it in front of Alice with a cup of coffee, then stood back and waited till Alice finished eating. Alice didn't realize it, but she was much hungrier than she thought she was, and the omelet was the first thing she had eaten since getting back from Albeck. This is so good, Trevor, said Alice as she ate slowly, trying to figure out what Trevor was planning to do. Was he going to try and talk her out of leaving? She didn't know. All she did know was that nothing would stop her from seeing Ophelia and confronting her about the blood, and also her mother's whereabouts. Thank you, Miss Grayson, replied Trevor. But listen, be careful, okay? I know that you're going to go and do something reckless now. What do you mean? How do you know? Asked Alice, feeling as if Trevor was reading her mind. Because you're leaving the house during the day, knowing that Mr. Page wouldn't be able to follow you, and also the fact that you don't want Mr. Page to follow you tells me that you're going to do something drastic, and don't want him to get involved. It isn't safe out there, Miss Grayson, and I do believe that the safest place for you right now is here, with us. Don't worry, Trevor, I'll be fine, said Alice, now smiling again at Trevor. She found it very sweet that he tried just as hard as Oliver to keep her safe. I'll be fine, okay? I'm only going to see Ophelia, and because it's the day, she won't be as strong. I can handle her. What? You're going to see Ophelia? Gasped Trevor as his voice shivered. Alice, please listen to me. Ophelia is extremely dangerous. You can't go in there alone. Alice watched as Trevor revealed to her the bruises left by Ophelia. She's not someone who should be taken lightly, said Trevor as he tried putting his injuries away. I'm not someone to be taken lightly either, said Alice as she caught Trevor's arm and put her hand to his wounds, healing them instantly. Alice then got up and left without saying another word. Trevor did not try to stop her because at that point, he wasn't sure he could. Chapter 37. Where does your allegiance lie? Alice stood on the sidewalk facing the building where the magazine was located. She couldn't help but reminisce about her first few months as an intern and how hard Christina had been on her, Sammy and Brian. The only goal at the time was to make a name for herself at the magazine, but things were different now. The doors in front of her didn't hold the same promise of opportunity anymore. They didn't hold the possibility of a better future for herself and her mother. Alice turned her head to the left and looked at the alley where she had been attacked by Jason, and felt guilty that someone so innocent was pulled into this chaotic war against Ophelia. Ophelia needed a pawn and Jason was just that. He didn't deserve his fate, and he wasn't the only one. Sammy, I'm sorry that I couldn't save you, said Alice as she turned her attention back towards the building. I'm sorry that I was such a lousy friend. You were always there for me, and I will never forget you. Mom, I'm sorry that someone so loving, so caring, someone so full of light, would be pulled into a world so dark. Ophelia isn't going to get away with any of this. I have the power to stop her now, so please watch over me. Alice stood deep in thought, going over the plan again and again in her head so as not to forget anything. In Alice's opinion, her plan was perfect. All she needed was to get Ophelia in her office. The doors of the elevator opened and Alice stepped out into the offices of the magazine. The place was neat, and there were no signs of any struggle having taken place. Ophelia must have had the place cleaned up after last night, Alice thought to herself. She remembered the sound of shattering glass when Ophelia had tossed Sammy's body to the side. But there was nothing, not a shard out of place. Alice walked through the bullpen when she saw her colleagues huddled together as usual, and felt a pain in her heart knowing Sammy wasn't standing with them. Alice tried to walk through the bullpen without getting noticed, when suddenly she heard her name being called out from the other side of the room. Alice looked over to see Brian standing by the water cooler, and thought to herself that she might want to tell him what was going on. She didn't know what was about to happen, but if she could have someone in the office that she knew she could trust, it would help her a lot. Hey, where have you been? Asked Brian as he stood up straight, bringing the water to his lips. Have you heard from Sammy or Jason? They didn't come to work today. Ophelia told us this morning that all three of you called in sick. Alice told Brian everything and waited for him to take it all in. At first, Brian argued with Alice, asking her if she was going crazy, asking her if she thought he was crazy, until Alice pulled Brian to the side, showing him how she created fire from her palm, then froze the flame, turning it into a piece of solid ice, and dropping it into his hand. Brian couldn't believe what he was seeing, but it was enough to convince him that Alice wasn't lying. Brian agreed to help Alice, and asked her what she needed from him. Alice instructed Brian to stand close by to their colleagues in case things got messy, and people needed to be evacuated. Brian nodded and walked across the room to take up his position, while Alice, now finally ready, made her way to Ophelia's office. Alice barged into Ophelia's office and found Ophelia in a meeting with two of her executives. The two executives looked startled, but Ophelia had a smile on her face as she looked up at Alice, giving Alice the impression that Ophelia knew she was coming. Ophelia kindly asked the two executives if they could speak to her assistant about rescheduling their meeting, telling them there was an important matter that needed tending to, and showed the two executives to the door, closing it behind them. Alice, what brings you here? Asked Ophelia, who seemed to be in a great mood. I didn't think you were coming in today after what happened last night. I told everyone you worked late, so I gave you, Sammy and Jason, the day off. Alice looked at Ophelia with a blank expression on her face because she couldn't believe how sadistic Ophelia truly was. She had turned a decent man into a monster, took the life of her best friend, and possibly also abducted her mother. How could Ophelia play the fool after causing so much chaos? "I'm here to end this," said Alice as she readjusted herself, irritated by Ophelia's response. "What do you mean to end this?" asked Ophelia as she dropped the facade. "Have you come to turn yourself in? I told you I wasn't ready for you yet, but I could always keep you stored away till the time comes." Ophelia smiled at Alice, believing that her prey had come to her. Although she didn't have a problem getting to Alice at any point, Oliver was still going to put up a fight. Things couldn't have worked out better for Ophelia. "Don't get me wrong, Ophelia. I'm not going with you. I said I came here to end this. No one is going anywhere. You aren't leaving this office." Ophelia looked at Alice and started laughing at the arrogance that Alice had started showing after only one night. "Where is all this coming from?" asked Ophelia, sounding as if she couldn't be more amused. "You're talking quite big for someone who doesn't have their guard dog with them. What exactly do you think you're going to do on your own? You fking insect." Ophelia dashed over to Alice and grabbed her by the throat, making it difficult for Alice to breathe. Alice kicked and struggled, but Ophelia's grip only tightened. "Don't worry, I'm not going to kill you the same way I killed your friend. I have other plans for you." Ophelia watched as Alice struggled for air, when suddenly Ophelia's hand started heating up. Ophelia looked at her hand, watching the inside of her skin turn red as the blood started to boil inside her skin. She felt pain surging through her arm, making her lose her grip. "What the FCK is this?" asked Ophelia as she backed up away from Alice, holding her hand in agony. "It's natural magic," replied Alice as she let air into her lungs in order to relax her breathing. "I found that I had a strong connection towards it, and it allows me to do a lot of things." Ophelia watched as the handprint she had made on Alice's neck healed instantly, then looked down and saw that the burn caused from touching Alice had started to spread and started burning off pieces of her arm. "I came here to make you suffer," said Alice as she stood over Ophelia, who crawled backwards in order to create shelter for herself in the corner of her office. Ophelia didn't know what to do. Alice had suddenly gained immense power overnight, and it was not something she was anticipating. "I'm going to make you tell me where my mother is," said Alice as she moved closer to Ophelia and bent down in front of her. "I'm not going to tell you anything. Honestly, I'd rather let you kill me so I could watch you suffer from hell. So go ahead, kill me. I can make you feel like you're in hell if you want it so badly," said Alice as she rubbed her hand against Ophelia's face. Ophelia started feeling water coming up from inside her, quickly filling her lungs and making water gush from her mouth. Alice watched as Ophelia drowned in front of her, her eyes watering as she grabbed at her throat, struggling for air. Ophelia stuck out her hand, trying to reach for Alice, but Alice got up and moved backward so as not to wet herself. The battle felt won, and Alice stood victorious. She was in complete control and Ophelia was at her mercy. All of the fighting, all of the suffering could finally come to an end. Alice believed nothing could go wrong when suddenly, she felt a striking pain rushing from her head to the rest of her body. She felt herself losing consciousness as she fell to the floor. Who attacked her? Alice wanted to know. She fought to keep her eyes open till she fell to the ground and saw a glimpse of the person who had hit her from behind, the same person whom she had done her internship with, the person whom she entrusted the safety of her